A family is on a trip in a white car on the road, and meanwhile, a boy in the back seat is playing a PvP game on his phone. At this moment, the boy's father and the car driver asks his son Gilsu to turn off the phone. However, the boy doesn't show much importance to his father's orders and the trip continues normally. In light of this, his mother warns their son, disappointed that his father is calling him, and in this case, the boy should at least respond to him. Despite the mother's warnings, the boy's father looks in the rearview mirror and notices that his son isn't paying attention to anything that's being said. In this context, the boy, while playing his game, thinks that his father regrets many things, and remembering how he is treated like trash at school, the boy is certain that his father will never be proud to have raised such a weak and pathetic son like him. To try to break the ice, the boy's mother says that if the other students harass or hit him at this school too, he can just give up, because in the end, she states that she just wants her son to live a life where he feels comfortable. However, Gilsu knew it was a lie because it was his mother who made them move so he could transfer to another school when he wanted to stop studying. Amidst that family drama, the trip continues as planned, but the boy loses the battle in his phone game. Thus, already hopeless with everything around him, he wonders if he should just take his own life. Later, things happen as usual, with the boy transferring to another school again and attending his first day. Upon entering this new school, he just thinks about wanting to escape from there, either due to the appearance of an earthquake or perhaps an invasion from North Korea. Finally, the moment to introduce himself to the class arrives and Gilsu says his name to everyone, also stating that he has never been there before. In conclusion, he states it's a pleasure to meet everyone despite thinking about wanting time to stop. In the end, he just wanted nothing bad to happen this time, and at this moment, unexpectedly, one of the students started clapping for the newcomer. Quickly, all the students follow the example of clapping, and many of them reciprocate the pleasure of meeting him. The one who started the clapping happily comments to the other students that they finally have someone from Seoul in the class, someone who exudes a different aura. So he doesn't waste time and asks the protagonist to sit next to him, which left the boy quite incredulous. Later in the classroom, apparently the inevitable was about to happen with a tall and strong student heading towards Gilsu and calling his attention. Witnessing it being two people very similar to bullies, the boy responds, but his mind understands what's to come. He remembers his past times when very similar people would find him in moments of silence and solitude to torment him. At this moment, the protagonist just hopes that this doesn't happen again, and one of the boys places one of his hands on his back. Unexpectedly, the boy peacefully introduces himself as Duel Jin and invites the newcomer to go to the convenience store together to get to know the school. He says he will show the way to the school, and despite being very confused, Gilsu accepts without any problems. Already at the convenience store, the boys burst into laughter while talking, and the protagonist thinks it's his first time going to a place like this with friends. To break the ice, Duel asks the boy if he has ever seen eyebrows like his friends and teases that this is the reason his girlfriend broke up with him. The boy, in turn, comments a bit uncomfortably that it's his friend's charm and thought he wasn't expecting such a question. Thus, the two started a friendly discussion about the student's eyebrow, and Gilsu finally managed to see a glimmer of light in the darkness. Looking more closely at that school, everyone seemed very happy, something completely different from his old schools. In this case, while drinking the juice box and walking around the place, the protagonist believes that maybe he can too. However, due to being lost in thoughts, Gilsu accidentally bumped into a man who was passing by his side. This clearly made him uncomfortable since his white shirt was stained by the spilled juice from the box. After realizing the confusion that could be generated, Gilsu panics, apologizing and stating that he will give all the money necessary for the boy to wash the shirt. However, the man walks away saying it's alright and thanking for the offer, removing the boy's worry about his clothes. With this, Gilsu realizes that like the others, this person is also very kind, and in this case, he thinks that maybe he can live a normal life there. Later, at the end of the first school day, the boy thinks that the atmosphere there is completely different from his other school, with everyone being very nice. Finally, he understands that he worried for no reason and is happy to have moved. However, at this moment, Duel appears, calling for the newcomer and asking if he has any plans for tonight. When he answers that he doesn't, the boy asks if Gilsu would like to see a certain place with him, which the boy accepts without any problems. Later, as night falls, the two head towards that certain place as agreed. However, the protagonist notices that they have been walking for some time and there is still no sign of being close. In light of this, the boy asks where his colleague is taking him as he already feels like they've been walking for a long time. In this case, Duel says that the place is indeed a bit far, but the boy needs to go there since he is new at the school. The protagonist is quite confused about needing to do something that he doesn't know what it is. However, he starts thinking that they are moving further and further away from the city center. Duel, in turn, asks if the boy has ever fought boxing or something similar in his life, and the boy replies that he hasn't. Then the senior advises that the boy will need courage for what they are about to do. But as they are very close to the place, the man tells his colleague to hurry up and drops the subject for the moment. Gilsu definitely hadn't noticed before, but his colleague had many scars on his body. With this, he remembers the bullies from his past who used knives and other bladed weapons to torment him and thinks that maybe he is getting into a trap. Understanding what he is getting into, the protagonist stops walking and tries to escape the situation by saying that he has an appointment at the moment. However, Duel grabs him by the shoulder with a serious expression saying that they are almost there. In view of this, he asks the newcomer to at least come and see the place, once as it is said that he will like it. Later that night, the two finally arrive at the intended place and Gilsu regrets it because he let himself be led like a helpless fool. In this situation, the boy understands that, in the end, it was all just another lie in that kindness and those friendly smiles. So at the moment the gate opens, the protagonist thinks he is going to be harassed again and closes his eyes, expecting the worst. However, upon opening his eyes, the boy finds himself facing a completely different reality than expected, seeing two people fighting in a ring. Amidst that fight, the students are extremely excited and cheer for their bets on the two. At this moment, one of them lands a powerful kick to his opponent's face, and the protagonist is impressed by this, but then it's time for the fighters to switch. Duel, laughing, comments to the newcomer that he must be in shock, so the boy really asks what this place is. Thus, the senior informs that this place is the school's fight arena and the greatest privilege offered to the students. For a moment, the protagonist doesn't quite understand what is happening, and at this moment on the stairs, one of the fighters calls for the senior. He, who is the president of the high school student council at Six Gate School, asks who the boy next to his friend is. Then Duel explains that the boy was transferred to his class today, and the protagonist thinks about how intimidating that high school student is. The boy from before calls the senior to the ring, saying he has been waiting for him and stating that he will make him regret mocking his eyebrows. In this case, Duel hurries to get into the ring without hesitation, and the protagonist realizes that it is his friend from before. To introduce himself, the big guy says he is Chun, the president of the student council of the school. And after the formalities of welcoming Gilsu, he is impressed by the size of the man in front of him. Looking back, the protagonist notices that all the students are paying attention to the fight happening in the ring. The two land powerful punches on each other's faces, making the boy question the reason for the fight since in his mind, they are friends. Chun in turn gets excited due to the quality of this year's freshmen and praises them loudly. In light of this, the boy becomes even more confused, not knowing who the student council president really is. With his arms crossed and feeling proud, the man comments that this is the true face of his school, and the protagonist apologizes for not understanding. In this case, Chun explained that as the boy had already observed, there were no bullies in his school. However, like any other place, they also have violence, but the difference is that it is reserved for just this space. The president knew that the boy had gone through a lot in his old school, so he stated that he could vent his frustrations here. Because this is a school where everyone is equal in terms of violence, being the famous and respected Six Gates School Fight Arena. Saying he doesn't like anything too complex, Chun states that he won't keep repeating himself, so the boy's attention is necessary at this moment. The first rule of the place is that only Six Gate School students are allowed there, and entry is not allowed in case of graduation or any other reason. The second rule is that all fights are one-on-one without the use of weapons, and a third person cannot be involved in any way. Finally, the third rule implies that a student council member must always be in the ring to serve as the fight referee and also decide the result. Suddenly, the man appears happy to have found the protagonist in that place. He asks for the smile where the newcomer has been all this time, and Gilsu remembers that this is the man he bumped into earlier. Then the student invites the protagonist to fight to make up for the cleaning fee of his shirt. So Chun pushes him forward, happy that the newcomer already has an opponent because in his mind, nothing is better than learning by doing. However, Gilsu is reluctant. In light of this, the student council president informs the fourth rule, which prohibits any kind of violence outside the fight arena, with any disagreement having to be resolved in the ring. However, the most important rule of all was for the fighters not to be intimidated by fear and just focus on having fun. Inevitably, Gilsu ended up in the ring but couldn't stop thinking about how he could have fun in a fight since his routine consisted of being beaten up. After a few moments, the referee raises his right hand, telling the fighters to get ready. And even though he is already there, Gilsu believes he has no chance of winning a fight against someone like his opponent. In the end, his 3 years of experience as a bullying victim were telling him to get out of there as quickly as possible. Quickly, the gong sounds and all the students cheer for the fight that is about to start. One of them, however, comments that the newcomer is really unlucky to be chosen by Kang on his first day, and another one asks if this student is famous. In response, the first one says that Inhe is that guy's younger brother, and the circulating rumors indicate that he came to the school this year. After waiting a bit, the man realizes that the protagonist is not going to attack him, so he says he will go easy on him since it's his first time. Gilsu, however, has his body frozen due to the strong fear he is feeling at this moment and is very anxious about everything happening so suddenly. Since his opponent is not coming to him, Inhe decides to take the initiative and runs towards the protagonist to give him his first punch. In light of this, Gilsu becomes even more scared and starts trembling, thinking that the big guy is going to beat him up. This makes the protagonist start feeling sick, and inevitably an unforeseen event happens in the ring. Definitely, this is not something the students or even his opponent, who is now completely covered in vomit, were expecting. Despite taking everything in stride until now, the boy's act makes Inhe truly angry. And at this moment, a pause occurs, allowing space for the students' comments about the fight's prototype presented. They laugh a lot about what happened, but Inhe is not happy at all, repeatedly ordering for a towel to be brought to him. Gilsu, on the other hand, while feeling sick on the ring floor, wondered how he could hit someone, even being someone who has never rebelled in his life. The next day at school, rumors circulate among the students about the previous day in the fight arena, with the newcomer vomiting on his opponent. Hidden inside a bathroom stall, the protagonist hears everything while trembling with fear, thinking he is completely doomed. Initially, he thought this was a normal school, but suddenly a parallel fight arena was presented to him against his will. The boy remembers the student council president's comment about having fun, but he knows that when put to the test, he won't even be able to throw a punch, and something like the previous day will likely happen again today. However, a glimmer of hope appears when Gilsu remembers that there is no violence inside the school, meaning he might avoid the arena. Back in the classroom, Chun is very busy, striving to complete 1,000 push-ups. And despite requiring a lot of effort, after a long time, he manages it even with the added weight of 2 students on his back. With this, he boasts about his achievement, and the protagonist is impressed that he is just a high school student. After his morning push-up routine, Chun asks if the newcomer wants to ask him something. Awkwardly, Gilsu explains that he has something he would like to ask about the fight arena. In this case, the president asks if it's about his vomiting ability, and at this moment, the other students join the conversation, recalling it with good humor. However, the protagonist explained that it wasn't about that. The real reason he came today was to say that he would not go to the arena anymore. With this, everyone is surprised and even a little scared by the declaration, which makes Chun question the reason since the boy hasn't been hurt yet. Gilsu then explains that he has no confidence to fight another person and doesn't find it fun to hit someone. The boy doesn't understand the logic behind the fight arena, and so he continues with his request not to go back there anymore. In response to this declaration, the student council president understands the message, implying a free pass to assault the boy as much as he wants from now on. Gilsu doesn't understand what is happening, and without delay, the man announces as the arena manager that the student is no longer under the protection of the fight arena. Later at school, while sitting at his desk, the boy wonders what this protection of the fight arena is and what it will change in his life. And at this moment, some students from other classes come to the protagonist's room, realizing it is the right place. These are the students from the previous day, and the group leader recalls hearing that the newcomer will no longer go to the fight arena. So without wasting time, he hits Gilsu in the face while he is at his desk in an extremely violent act. He then says he will teach the boys slowly what the arena means for their school. In the end, Inhe said he really needed a new slave, now branding the protagonist as his personal servant. Even amid all that violence, the students around just ignored and laughed in their own conversations. After kneeing the boy in the face, a group member comments that this student transferred there after being beaten so much at his last school. Inhe is satisfied with this, although he had already noticed it when he started beating him. With this, he said the boy should start coming to his room every time there is a break. And that's when Gilsu began to understand what the protection of the arena meant. It's a place where if you don't participate, you become the only student who can be assaulted. Thus, this was the beginning of the protagonist's hellish life once again. Days later in the staff room, the boy files a complaint to stop studying despite being at the school for less than a week. To support his requests, the student says he is preparing for exams that are more important to him. In this case, the administration staff accepts the request because if that's what the student wants, there's nothing that can be done. In the end, Gilsu thinks he has done everything he could and apologizes to his father and mother for having such a useless son. After leaving the school, the boy thinks that now that his terrible school life is over, he will start a normal life from the next day. And suddenly, on his way, Chun is there, questioning why the boy isn't trying to fight. Such an attitude was not common for the president, who couldn't help but question what the student's problem was. In response, Gilsu just apologizes because he knows that someone crazy about fights will never understand how he feels. Honestly, the protagonist states that violence is a trauma for him because he has been suffering assaults for a long time. Finally, he has reached his limit, and now all he wants to do is give up. Gilsu continues with his sad speech, but he is stopped by the president, who says the boy is more pathetic than he imagined. The boy is confused, so Chun decides to clear up the misunderstanding once and for all by stating that the boy doesn't need to fight like a professional or have techniques. If he doesn't have teeth, he should use his gums, and if he doesn't have strength, courage should come into play. In the end, fighting's about that. However, at this exact moment, the protagonist isn't doing the minimum to protect himself, and Gilsu, being grabbed by the shirt, didn't understand why this was happening to him since he hadn't done anything wrong. Already extremely irritated, the student council president asks if the boy believes he will find a rosy world after leaving school. He states that this won't happen, and the student will remain a loser for the rest of his humble life. After that light berating, the boy is finally allowed to leave, but he doesn't take the advice seriously since the president has always been strong. On his way again, the protagonist encounters some familiar faces, but this time it's the group of bullies who comment on Gilsu's departure. In this case, and he asks how the boy can quit school without talking to them first. Because if he leaves, Inhe won't have anyone to be his punching bag since he hasn't had one since Chun created the fight arena. In a frightening manner, the bully asks if the boy really thinks everything will end with the decision to leave school, and he forces Gilsu to come with him to a certain hidden place. Later in an alley, the protagonist is beaten, while the students mock the only loser of Six Gate School, treating him like a human toy. With so many punches and kicks, the protagonist believes he will die and begs the men to stop. But from a distance, lighting his cigarette, Inhe says the boy should be grateful for the situation he's in. Because if the boy had attended school during his brother's time, he would probably already be dead. Changing the subject while looking at his phone, he asks if what was sent to him earlier is correct and thanks his excellent informant. Looking at the phone screen, he is impressed that his mascot lives in such a nice place. He then states Gilsu's exact address, even pointing out the apartment in the building, and says with a diabolical smile that they will visit him next time. Laughing, Inhe says they will do their best to meet frequently since the boy will no longer participate in the fight arena. Held by two bullies, the protagonist panics and asks what the men are planning to do with his address in hand. However, Inhe doesn't answer and just tells the boy to stay quiet because he will send a picture of him all beaten up to everyone at school. As his face is squeezed by the bully's hands, the boy wonders what he did wrong for this to be happening to him. He thought everything would end and this painful abyss would finally be left behind like in a distant future. But despite trying his best to detach from his reality, he is inevitably pulled back, unable to escape this hell. At this moment, Gilsu remembers the student council president's words about not needing to fight like a professional. For Chun, techniques were not necessary and the person should use what was at their disposal. However, the student wasn't doing even the minimum to protect himself. With this, the protagonist smiles on the brink of madness and starts screaming while being held by the three bullies. Inhe, on the other hand, says that this loser screaming is very funny while filming him and telling his colleagues to hold him tighter. In desperation, Gilsu questions the heavens why this is happening to him and what he did wrong. As Gilsu struggles, the phone flies out of the bully's hand and falls to the ground, cracking the screen. Then the boy reiterates that his colleagues should hold him tighter. Already hopeless, the protagonist thinks metaphorically that if he doesn't have teeth, he will use his gums. And so he finally reacts by biting the bully's hand, who becomes furious with the unexpected action. Inhe tries to break free, but it's useless, and the boy continues to remember the student council president's advice. Thus, the decision is made once and for all, and although it started well, Gilsu receives a punch in the face from the bully whose hand was bitten. The boy writhes in pain on the ground, but Inhe, even while standing, is not feeling less pain than the losing student. Soon the protagonist wipes the blood from his mouth and questions the pain the bully is feeling. Inhe doesn't quite understand what is being asked. Then Gilsu, furious, explains that if he is going to die, he will drag everyone to hell with him. In view of this, Inhe is somewhat impressed but recalls that even a cornered rat bites back. Therefore, despite the rebellion, a loser is still a loser, and without delay, two of the bullies run towards the protagonist. When they get close in a very clever move, Gilsu throws a handful of sand into the student's eyes, preventing them from advancing. At this moment, he remembers that he must do whatever he can, not caring about techniques or trivialities. In the end, he didn't need to look good while fighting because his well-being was all that really mattered. In light of this, Inhe understood the boy's clever move using the sand and wondered, impressed, if he had grabbed it when he fell. Although the boy has been doing well so far, the bullies decide to stop playing and go all out after Gilsu. In such a case, the boy thinks he has lost his mind, no longer understanding what he was thinking when he decided to fight these guys here and now. Time passes, and in the school's fight arena, the confrontations continue as usual. Suddenly, the door to the place starts to open, and Chun turns to see what is happening. Unexpectedly, a student who had renounced the arena before was back, wanting to participate in the fights. This was something that left everyone quite surprised and confused, but the protagonist is now firm in his convictions and won't let this opportunity pass. After hearing what was said, the student council president finally shows some optimism about the newcomer and thinks he is more interesting than expected. Having been accepted back, the protagonist prepares to fight against the bully who has been chasing him and whom he couldn't react to last time. In the audience, one of the bullies is irritated because he believes he deserves to beat up that nerd more than his colleague. This is Anicap's number 2, the famous Yahello Park. However, one of his companions taps his shoulder, advising him to speak lower since they are not alone. And looking at the council president, Yahello says he already knows the precautions that must be taken there. At this moment, unfortunately, the protagonist is losing the duel, having just received a punch in his face and a knee to his stomach, followed by another punch. Very proud of himself, Inhe mocks the boy who thought he could do something when facing him one-on-one. Then another powerful punch hits the protagonist's face, and the bully says that the boy's illusions are quite pathetic. He lands another blow, this time a kick to Gilsu's face, and grabbing him by the shirt, the bully asks if his opponent has had enough time to regret. However, looking into the eyes of the boy who used to be defenseless, he was now staring back with a determined look, which greatly irritated the bully. For this reason, Inhe resorted to humiliation, starting to slap his opponent's face while saying the boy was just a fool trying to fight back without knowing his place. With more and more slaps, he tells the boy to accept his fate as a loser and stay quiet because his world is not like TV cartoons or magic happens. And to end his speech with a final touch, he finishes by landing another kick to the protagonist's face. The students witness the fight, impressed by the senior's strength, but they can't help but worry about the newcomer's well-being as he is getting beaten up a lot. In such a case, the bully believes he hasn't gone too far since his opponent is still alive. But unexpectedly, Gilsu starts to get up again like a true hero, ready to continue the fight. Inhe then wonders what is happening because his last blow should have knocked the boy out. So he approaches the boy, telling him not to push his luck because if he keeps insisting, he might be killed. This last statement profoundly impacted the protagonist, because the possibility of being killed just from this didn't even cross his mind. After taking a severe beating, it's finally time for Gilsu to make his comeback as a true hero. He grabs the bully by the waist and starts pushing him while thinking that compared to everything he has been through so far, this is nothing. Having pushed him to the edge of the ring, Gilsu drops Inhe to the ground forcefully. In the audience, some of the students start getting excited about the latent potential of the newcomer that is now being revealed. On the ground, Inhe is incredulous that his opponent hasn't given up and tries to convince himself that it's because his guard was down. At this moment, the hero prepares to land a punch on the face of the man who has caused him so much suffering. Things were too good to be true, and reality soon hits when the veteran reacts faster with his punch. Once again proud of himself, Inhe asserts that his opponent won't be able to hit him with such slow blows. Then the hero remembers that if he doesn't have strength, he must use all his willpower, and thus he headbutts the veteran, causing significant damage. In the audience, the students are impressed with the newcomer's ability, and the council president just watches silently. Faced with the fight, Chun realizes that even though the adrenaline is masking the pain, the boy has already taken quite a beating. Therefore, Gilsu Lee earns some merit points from the man due to his extreme resilience. Even while being down, Inhe manages to get rid of the protagonist by kicking him with both legs, pushing him back. And the hero falls to the other side of the ring, groaning in pain. With that, the bully gets up, irritated and ready to finish off his opponent once and for all. However, unexpectedly, the protagonist shows no fear or hesitation, also being ready to fight. In his mind, the hero is indignant that this is all the gangs that always terrorized him can do. In the end, he realizes that he always worried for nothing since he always had the means to fight back proportionately. In the fight arena, the students now cheer for the newcomer, moved by his resilience and determination. Without wasting more time, Gilsu grits his teeth and for the first time charges at a bully. With a battle cry, he questions why he had been so afraid of these guys all this time and prepares a punch to unleash all of his anger. But unfortunately, things don't go as expected, and the protagonist receives a right hook before he can complete his move. With that, the duel between the two has its apparent result, and Inhe comments that he can't let the boy catch him off guard again. Thus, the hero falls to the ground in a knockout, and the winner of the fight is crowned as the bully who leaves the arena unconcerned. Later, Gilsu wakes up on a stretcher, completely sore and confused about where he is. He wonders if he passed out but understands that, in any case, he managed to defend himself, which is what mattered since he never had the illusion of winning. The boy concentrated all of his strength in the hope of landing at least one blow on the man, doing everything he could. However, at that moment of the punch, he thinks that if he had focused a little more instead of charging desperately, the fight wouldn't have ended so quickly. Or maybe the crucial point was to maintain focus as he did at the beginning on his lower limbs, but soon Gilsu understands that his opponent wouldn't have fallen with his guard up. At that moment, the boy trembles with rage because he knew that if he were just a little stronger, things would be different. And suddenly, when he opens his eyes, he sees Chun. The hero doesn't understand what's happening, and the president asks if the boy is feeling better now. Gilsu then asks if he is still there because of him, and Chun informs him that it's his responsibility as president to take care of students who end up unconscious. Furthermore, he says that the arena is not a place to literally kill someone in a fight, but actually a place to protect the students. Anyway, he warns that this will only happen today because from the next day, the boy will no longer be allowed in since he is no longer a student. With that said, Chun leaves and asks the boy to take good care of himself. But still kneeling on the ground, the protagonist asks what he needs to do. The student council president turns back confused, and the hero, with a determined attitude, states that he will no longer quit school. In that case, he simply asks the fighter to tell him what needs to be done to become so strong that no one ever dares to mess with him again. Hearing this speech from a student who was a complete failure not long ago made Chun quite excited. Thus, he states that training the weakest is also a duty of the student council president. In this case, the veteran asks if the little hero is ready for what is to come, and, without giving the boy time to respond, lands an uppercut to his stomach. With this, Chun asks how the newcomer felt about the punch, and if he feels like he's going to die. Despite this simple punch causing a lot of damage, the student council president explains with a smile that this is just the beginning, because he will make the boy endure these punches through a lot of training and suffering. Looking back, all the mistreatment in Gilsu's life began when he happened to be in front of Flying Sandal. That day, the students who were playing apologized and were worried about their colleagues' well-being. So Gilsu, in the first year of elementary school, responded that he was fine, albeit somewhat uncomfortably. And given his passive behavior, the sandal incident exposed the protagonist as a weakling who accepted everything in silence. Little by little, the bullies started to gang up on the boy, saying things like losers deserve a beating for not knowing how to defend themselves. Things like being thrown to the ground to be kicked by several people were part of the protagonist's routine, along with being extorted to pay for things for other students. Without even realizing it, one day the hero became so weak that he couldn't defend himself from anything. However, today things are different, and Gilsu is determined to be someone strong, completely different from his former self. He no longer wanted to be a pathetic being, so the student council president decided to help the boy by starting a training regimen that would be painful but worthwhile. In the end, everything happening now will be decisive for the protagonist's transformation into the king of violence. Later at school, the hero complains about the pain in his rib and considers the possibility that he has broken something. But he remembers that Chun called him to meet during breaks to increase the progress of the boy's body strengthening. Despite these words coming from the president's mouth, Gilsu is still a bit reluctant. However, suddenly someone calls the protagonist. It's Duel, who is surprised to see his colleague there because he thought he had given up. In response, the protagonist says he changed his mind, so his colleague gets excited that the newcomer is finally starting to like the fight arena. Thus, he hugs Gilsu amicably and praises his courage, making him a bit embarrassed. However, suddenly at the top of the staircase, the group of bullies appears again, and among them, the leader is happy that the punching bag has returned. In light of this, he asks if the boy came for revenge while laughing in his face. As he gets closer, he says the newcomer needs to know his place because he might end up being killed next time. After witnessing this arrogant attitude from the group, Duel is surprised to look at his colleague, who shows no trace of fear, only anger. Gilsu then thinks, determined that he will become stronger so that he never loses to scum like him again. Later on the rooftop, the boy takes a punch right in the middle of his face and then receives another, even stronger one in his stomach. Chun tells the boy to keep his eyes open and not be afraid to look directly at his opponent's fists. Grabbing the newcomer by the collar, the council president says that he doesn't have permission to fight until he completes his training. However, Gilsu is somewhat skeptical that something like this can be called training. As time passed, they trained this way on the school rooftop for several days, and inevitably, the protagonist kept getting beaten every time. This was a hellish training that consisted of only one person getting beaten in order to learn through pain. In the school's fight arena, the duel ends with Anicap's victory, leaving his opponent unconscious on the ground. One of the students in the stands comments to another that the winner has no more mercy since the fight against the newcomer, and the other bets that his ego was hurt. They talk among themselves that if In-hae had kept his head up, things would be different because that's his weak spot. With this, the veteran sees the students gossiping about him and decides to confront them. He asks why the student doesn't fight him since he is so confident. Faced with this, the student cowers and apologizes, knowing he stands no chance against someone of such a high level. Despite managing to lower the student's morale, In-hae leaves extremely angry about having to go through situations like this. He then asks his colleagues if they have seen Gilsu Lee today, but they say they haven't seen him recently, either there or during breaks. They mention that the boy doesn't usually come to the arena often, which makes In-hae irritated because it indicates that the boy is rejecting the arena again. However, upon thinking more about what it means to reject the arena, the veteran has an idea. He remembers the student council president who removed the boy's protection when he first decided to stop attending the arena. Thus, he smiles because he has a genius idea that will put an end to all his boredom. Finally, he finds a way to mess with the boy, who in his view is the biggest loser in the school. Later, the hero goes out for his night training, running on a track. Despite being very tired, he remembers everything he has suffered so far and remains resilient. He knows he can really become stronger now, but he is still reluctant about the effectiveness of the past training method. However, that is still not enough for the man who wants to become the strongest of all in the shortest time possible. Suddenly, interrupting the boy's run, a red motorcycle approaches at high speed and hits his elbow, making him groan in pain. Quickly, the man stops his motorcycle and asks what is happening while two more bikers come over. A bit irritated, the bully complains that the boy scratched his motorcycle, and in this confusing situation, he remains speechless. In this case, he apologizes but states that they need to have a little chat about it because his beloved motorcycle is damaged thanks to the boy. Thus, he informs that the repair will cost around 20,000 reis and the boy will have to pay for it. The hero then questions the reason for this since it was the man who hit him first and explains that he doesn't have any money on him. The bully in turn decides not to listen to logic as he is acting in bad faith and grabs the protagonist's hair while calling him a loser. With this, he punches Gilsu in the face, smiling as he tries to make the boy the wrong one in the story. The bullies, laughing, claim to be witnesses that the protagonist hit first and comment among themselves that this situation is funny. On the ground, Gilsu is dejected and very confused. Then one of the bullies asks why the boy isn't responding to them. Incredibly, at that moment, the protagonist was more focused on the fact that he wasn't feeling afraid of anything. Due to the boy's lack of response, the bully eases his demand, saying he will be satisfied if the hero gives all the money he has at the moment. And at this instant, Gilsu understands that he isn't feeling fear because he has been beaten by that monster all this time. Therefore, he quickly removes the bully's hand from his head in an act of resistance to the abuse, and he lands a powerful left hook on the man's face while questioning why he should give his money to someone like him. With his fist on the thug's face, Gilsu declares that he is no longer afraid of bullies like him. After landing that punch, unfortunately, the bully seems fine and even manages to grab the protagonist's hand. In this case, the hero doesn't know what to do because, despite losing his fear, he still couldn't put power into his punches. In a desperate act, Gilsu starts trying to hit the man in every possible way while thinking about what to do next. Until this moment, he hasn't learned about dealing damage, having only received knowledge about being hit. And when his turn comes, the bully retaliates with a kick to the hero's face, sending him back into the arms of the group. They hold the protagonist by his back and mock the boy for his actions so far. And to finish the boy off once and for all, the group leader puts on a pair of brass knuckles while asking his friends to hold the loser. With this, the bully says that after taking a beating, the boy will finally understand his proper place and why he shouldn't mess with him. Ready to land the punch just before the blow hits or the street is struck, the thug advises the loser to clench his teeth before being hit. Then the man warns that he is about to strike, but suddenly from above, Humiliation appears as the savior of the day. The bully doesn't understand what's happening and is confused, but without giving him time to react, the protagonist's friend delivers a knee strike. This makes the man fall unconscious to the ground and leaves the hero quite impressed with his friend's skills. With a smile, Duel realizes that the victim of the assault was actually his friend and notices that one of the thugs is behind him, ready to attack. Quickly, the student dodges the blow and easily retaliates with double of force. In a desperate act, the last member of the group tries to attack Gilsu's friend with an iron rod, but as he gets close enough, he's the one who gets hit first. Soon, the man falls unconscious to the ground, and the remaining girl in the group is extremely scared. She runs towards the unconscious boy and complains to him for leaving her alone while the protagonist admires his friend's strength. Gilsu is even more impressed by the normal expression his friend maintains despite his immense strength. At this moment, the girl from the group runs towards the boys, nervous, and asks if they know who they are. The girl says that they are the strongest first years from Ginseng Technical School, so if they report what happened to their superiors, it will all be over. However, the leader of the group waking up interrupts the conversation, drawing everyone's attention. The leader, while wiping the blood from his face, says that bringing the superiors won't do any good, even the students' clothes. On Doodle's shirt is the emblem of Six Gate School. So he gets up while carrying his unconscious friend and says that if he had known who he was dealing with, he wouldn't have done what he did. Then, as quickly as they came, they leave on their motorcycles, leaving only the air of defeat behind. With the conflict over, Duel asks how the involvement with the bullies started. Then for a while, the protagonist informs his friend about everything that has been happening, even recounting his training with the president. In this case, Duel understands that the boy is taking the fight arena seriously, but the hero states that despite training, he still remains weak. To break the heavy atmosphere, the hero's friend says he saw him flailing his arms, which was quite funny, leaving Gilsu embarrassed. Around a campfire, the Six Gates bullies discuss this way of dealing with the loser who might circumvent the arena system. In this context, their leader says that everything will be due to the shot the newcomer took at his own foot. Frege is the first of the entire school to openly say no to the combat arena. It is said that as long as they have arms and legs, anyone, whether a bully or a loser, can fight in the arena because it is a place where everyone is equal before violence. In this case, the students can boast about it, which is great, but if looked at closely, the situation is different. It is a fact that among the students, there are those who are cowards and only watch the fights, never participating and maintaining a loser mentality. The leader's colleagues agree with him and understand that these students hide behind the rules to have a comfortable time at school. However, it is said that the fool who exposed this was the transfer student, as the situation can change if one of these losers is challenged. In light of this, they will think they need to fight at any cost to avoid becoming someone like Gilsu, which couldn't be more correct. Then, his eyes fill with vitality because he knows that from now on, the fight arena is his playground. Later, the thug is ready for another fight and asks Shum if there is any problem with his methods since he hasn't broken any rules in the arena. Given the boy's true intentions, the president touches his shoulder and advises it would be better if Inhei doesn't put on a pointless show of bravado. Then with a smile, the boy apologizes for causing a commotion and assures, ironically, that he will be more careful next time. Back on the school campus on the rooftop, the protagonist's training happens as usual during breaks. Gilsu takes many blows to the point of almost fainting, but unexpectedly, he regains consciousness and manages to block one of them. Having now achieved his first merit, he thinks he is no longer as scared as he used to be. And Shum is proud that his pupil is showing progress by getting used to some of the punches. At this moment, since he has advanced in one aspect, Gilsu tries to attack the president with everything he has. Because he knows that in the end, if he wants to win, he will have to hit his opponent more efficiently than he did last time. Thus, the protagonist punches multiple times in the air in an attempt to hit his opponent, but Shun easily dodges them all. Unable to take any more, the president yells at his student to be quiet while landing a punch on his stomach. Extremely irritated, the president tells the hero not to make strange sounds when attacking because it makes him look like a damn loser. After the advice, he informs him that in the end, it all comes down to the 1-2 combat strategy. With a proud smile, Chun states that if the hero masters this strategy, he will be able to win any fight easily. After the rooftop training, the two go to a place called Arcade Club. Then the protagonist questions why they are there since it is a very old and run-down building. Ignoring the complaints, the student council president takes the hero inside the room, and when he opens the door, he finds a training dummy. Gilsu is quite surprised to see something like this in such a place, something that will be very useful for his training. Without wasting time, Chun begins teaching the newcomer, telling him to raise both fists to chin level and tuck his chin down. Next, the protagonist should keep his shoulders at the same width as his legs, with one leg slightly back to improve his base. With this, the number 1 punch should be thrown lightly with the left hand in a move called a jab. Then for the number 2 punch, all the fighter's weight should be placed into it, making sure to rotate the hips and use the body weight to land a powerful blow. Despite being a very strong punch, the scoring machine only registers a 1, and the hero is impressed by his master's punch strength. After the theoretical lesson, it is finally time for Gilsu to show what he has learned so far. He remembers that the first punch should be thrown with the left hand lightly to gauge distance, then follow up with a right punch using hip rotation. Thus, Gilsu gets excited and believes he is finally getting the hang of it. But unexpectedly, the punch machine registers the same score as before when hit by the student council president. To teach the protagonist better, Chun lands a proper punch on the dummy while stating that weak punches won't do any good. It is mentioned that the punch machine has been broken for a long time and doesn't work well without the precise impact now registering 2 points. With this, the hero needs to hit hard enough for the machine to register the punch. Only then will it be approved that he can deal damage to his opponent. In this case, the big guy orders the protagonist to find his own way to make the score go up and not to appear in front of him until he achieves the maximum points. At school, a boy looks and notices a message from his girlfriend saying that they don't match and should go their separate ways. This boy is the one with the thick eyebrows who doesn't understand why this girl is acting like this again since she was fine when they went out the day before. Suddenly, the boy accidentally bumps into another student and then apologizes, saying he didn't see him. However, this man trips the boy with thick eyebrows, making him fall to the ground and crack the side of his phone. With a proud smile, the man, along with his group, apologizes, saying he accidentally bumped into him. And already on the ground, the bullied student asks if this was intentional, which the bully denies despite acting in bad faith, still not wanting to admit it. In any case, he says that if they have a problem, they can solve it in the arena. And with this proposal on the table, the bullied student cowers. Avoiding eye contact, he quietly accepts that it was his fault for not paying attention, and the students around observe, scared. Thus, the man leaves while claiming it wasn't school violence, convincing the boy through fear that it was all just a mistake. With the bully's departure, Duel steps in to help his friend who is lying on the ground. As he holds him in his arms, he asks what just happened, and since it was intentional violence, he recommends they report it to the guidance council. However, the boy with the thick eyebrows decides to downplay the incident because he knows it's not worth making a big fuss with this kind of people. Since he wasn't the target of the aggression, Duel respects his friend's decision but remains extremely angry. Meanwhile, in the cafeteria, Gilsu devours a plate of food and thinks that during his week-long punch training, his hunger has increased significantly. Lately, he believes he has punched that machine hundreds of times, but the score remains the same, showing how difficult it is to improve. Suddenly, in the cafeteria, the bully from before appears to torment another student. With a smile on his face, the blonde dumps his entire tray of food on the protagonist's face and pretends not to understand the situation to try to downplay it. However, right after that, he slaps the hero's back hard and tries to disguise it as a friendly reunion gesture. More and more slaps hit Gilsu's back, and the blonde keeps saying it's good to see him again after so long. With his hands raised, the bully asks if the boy is still the same as always before continuing to hit him. Later, after the cafeteria incident, the group of thugs discusses what happened with great enthusiasm and remembers that the boy even apologized. With that, they say the next step is to catch Gilsu in the arena and show him what happens when someone decides to mess with them. Thus, the blonde claims he will handle it, not needing the group leader's interference in such a trivial duel. Inhei, on the other hand, asks how it will be done, but just asks for his leader's trust. Back in the cafeteria, when the tray of food was thrown at the protagonist's face, he grabbed the bully's arm with a serious expression. The blonde was a bit impressed that the boy could resist now and said he looked even cuter when he was angry. Faced with this, Gilsu doesn't know what to do because he is currently prohibited by the student council president from fighting both in the arena and at school. However, he believes that with things reaching this point, he has no choice since he has been training hard until now. Fortunately, before making a decision he would bitterly regret, Duel intervenes by throwing his tray of food at the aggressor's face. The bully is surprised that this is happening, and Duel says that when someone is eating, not even a dog should be disturbed. With his face completely covered in food, the bully yells, asking who was responsible for this. Determined to see justice served, Duel stands up, taking responsibility for his actions, and says that this bastard needs to know his limits. With his face completely covered in food, the bully furiously asks if the student is crazy or wishing for his death. In this case, he apologizes and says that this isn't school violence, which only angers the bully more. To explain, Duel says that his hand just slipped, accidentally causing the tray to spill. Thus, the boy tells the bully that he has wanted to fight him for a long time, and this is the perfect excuse for the fight to happen. Therefore, he tells the blonde to show up at the fight arena that afternoon to be properly educated. Later, the hero goes to his friend and apologizes for making him do all that to protect him, but Duel says he acted for another reason. Duel says that although it seems like he has been trying to defend the boy from the beginning, he had no intention of fighting. In the end, the veteran had wanted to educate that gang for a long time because he couldn't stand the way they acted in the fight arena. Faced with this, the protagonist doesn't fully understand, so Duel sits down to explain the recent events since the boy doesn't usually frequent the arena. The veteran explains that these bastards have been unilaterally choosing the weak to assault in the ring, using lame excuses to justify themselves. It is said that when the students get scared, they mention the day the hero refused to participate in the arena and lost its protection. Duel hadn't had the opportunity to confront them until now, but finally managed to, which is good because he couldn't stand watching the fight arena this way. The hero decides to sit down as well and asks why his friend wants to protect the arena so much. Since he is strong, it doesn't matter to him whether the place exists or not, so he questions the reason behind it. In this case, the veteran explains that he also had a dark period in his life, just like Gilsu. Years ago, typical local bullies used to intimidate the man who is now strong and fearless. While Duel was pinned against a post with embarrassing drawings on his body, they decided to force him to drink coffee mixed with urine. In the past, the veteran was fat and shy, frequently bullied since middle school. With things like this happening in his life, the hell seemed so dark that the boy thought it would be better to die. Then one day, someone intervened, acting as his savior to stop this endless suffering. A tall, strong man didn't let the boy be forced to drink that strange liquid, grabbing the bully's hand and reprimanding him. After being freed, Duel went to the man to thank him and ask for his name. With that, the man handed a paper to the boy who was being bullied by his peers. He then asked if the boy would like to try diet boxing, a kind of training that strengthens the body while teaching martial arts. In the end, it turned out that his savior was the director of a nearby boxing gym. And after that, Duel tried boxing for the first time. Soon he became obsessed with the sport, trying to improve more and more and evolving exponentially. Finally, after a long period of training, this is how boxing transformed the boy's life. After that, Duel returned to school, no longer accepting being bullied and put down. Those who used to beat and belittle him now begged for mercy, apologizing for all their past actions. Thus, the boy imposed himself in the hierarchy of his school, and no one ever dared to bother him again. The veteran explains that even the bastards who pose as tough guys were nothing when confronted. Besides, he says that although the combat arena rules are a bit excessive, it's a place where one can use their own power without being suppressed by fear. Therefore, this is why the veteran wants to keep the fight arena so much, and he asks the newcomer to watch as he takes down his opponent tonight. Later, shouts are heard in the arena, and the duel between the two students is finally about to begin. The bully, with a proud expression, comments that he doesn't know why he was challenged to fight there, but warns that it was a stupid decision by Duel. In this case, Duel asks if his opponent is there to fight with words or fists, and the blonde warns that his opponent will regret this haste. In the audience, the protagonist cheers for his classmate, hoping a good lesson will be taught to that gang member. Thus, the fight finally begins with a signal from the student council referee. Due to his arrogant personality, the blonde takes the initiative and charges with a left punch that misses its target. The bully is then impressed that the boy managed to dodge, and more punches are thrown, but none of them land. Unlike the bully, the veteran lands a punch on the face, sending the blonde flying backward. Seeing this, the audience begins to be impressed with Duel's skills, especially praising his reaction speed. The bully, for his part, bleeds from his nose, thinking that his opponent is faster than expected. Upon closer analysis, the blonde understands that boxing is his rival's martial art and notices that his footwork is excellent. Without wasting time, Duel charges forward, throwing several jabs which scare the bully due to their speed but disappoint him in terms of strength. In this case, he believes he is the strongest there and now returns to the offensive with more confidence. After understanding his opponent's fighting style, the blonde manages to penetrate his guard, but just as he is about to land a hook, Duel's fist meets his. The bully is sent flying backward with a strong impact to his chin, making the veteran proud. Seeing this, the bully realizes the hard way that the opening in his guard was a trap to land that punch. As the fight heats up, the audience becomes more and more excited, and Gilsu starts to see hope as the bully park hasn't landed a single punch yet. The audience also begins discussing Duel's strength and speculates that the blonde's winning streak might now be interrupted. However, even though everything seemed fine at the moment, Gilsu was very worried to discover that Park was on a winning streak. Back in the fight, the bully tries to attack desperately, but the veteran easily dodges all the blows. In this case, already very irritated, Park wonders why he can't land a single punch. In response, Duel mocks his opponent for trying to throw long attacks even though he hasn't been able to land precise ones. And while landing a jab on Park's face, he tells him that small punches need to connect so the bigger ones can land too. With that, after a powerful right punch, the bully is thrown to the ground and Duel mocks him, questioning why he looks for fights when he's so weak. Furthermore, Duel tells the blonde to stop looking for trouble out there to avoid getting into a worse mess someday. At this moment, after regaining some energy, the bully looks at the stands and notices the presence of his leader among the students. Inhe looks at Park with a strong, murderous intent, and in his mind, the bully hopes that his leader won't worry anymore because he won't lose. After taking so much of a beating, the thug stands up and admits that his opponent is better than him at boxing. However, at this moment, he states that he will handle the situation appropriately. So he raises his knees above waist level, which surprises the veteran. With that, Park reveals his true fighting stance in real fights, which is quite different from the one commonly used in boxing. Finally, with a serious look in his eyes, the boy challenges Duel to try to attack him if he can. Considering his opponent's fighting stance, Duel thinks that a kick might be used against him. In this case, he charges at the boy with a kick, attempting to surprise Park with the same move. However, after landing the kick, Duel feels pain because he hits the bully's shin, which for some reason seems very resilient. Park tries to land a right punch, but the veteran manages to dodge and thinks it's better to increase the distance between them. However, the bully doesn't allow this and continues to advance to attack. Park prepares another kick, this time aimed at the head, and Duel believes he can block it with his arm. However, when he blocks it, he feels the force of the kick, which hits him like a massive iron pillar. As a result, the boy is thrown back by the bully's kick, who is now using a martial art with Muay Thai characteristics. On the ring floor, the veteran wonders what's wrong with this level of power because even though he blocked it, the damage was still considerable. Without much time to think, Park approaches and lands another kick, this time fracturing Duel's right forearm bone as he tries to block it. Everyone in the arena can hear the bone crack, which scares the students, especially Gilsu, who was previously hopeful. The veteran manages to increase the distance between them for a short period. In this case, the bully asks what his opponent is doing and tells him to come at him the same way he did earlier. In his mind, Duel doesn't understand why his rival's kicks are so strong, but realizes that they are on a completely different level from the punches. After charging forward once more, the veteran wonders if another kick will be thrown and prepares to dodge since blocking causes immense damage. Unexpectedly, what came was a punch that landed precisely on the boy's face. Then more and more punches followed, all hitting their mark. In such a case, Park laughs, proudly saying that now his blows are landing. And Duel realizes he's so worried about the kicks that he can't even react properly. Thus, the bully recalls what was said about not ruining the fight arena and mocks the boy, stating that he is a nobody. In this way, he lands a low kick to the veteran's legs, causing immense damage since the legs are the main base for a boxer. Duel falls to his knees, and now the blonde finally takes control of the situation, saying that someone so weak should never dare tell him what to do. With his legs giving out, the moment arrives for Park to finish everything by delivering a kick that will end this fight forever. The blow approaches, and an intense noise echoes throughout the fight arena hall. Fortunately, when he opens his eyes, the veteran sees that the referee saved him from being hit by the bully. In this case, the third-year student council member, Hyo, explains that if the opponent is no longer in condition to fight, continuing will result in a foul. Thus, Park leaves while complaining about the fight being stopped so prematurely, but he is also satisfied to have had fun after a long time. He then comments while looking at the protagonist that maybe this is happening because there are kids in the audience who don't usually show up. With an intimidating look, the blonde warns that the fight arena will become even more fun in the future and advises the boy to start showing up there. Later, the hero carries his friend out of the place, and Duel blames himself for having just boosted the confidence of the bastards, causing chaos in the arena. To comfort the veteran, the protagonist recalls that he was winning at the beginning and only lost because of the kicks. The boy agrees because, strangely, the bully's kicks were very strong. Strong enough to leave him scared and unsure of how to react. After finally reaching their destination, the veteran thanks him for the help and asks if his friend wants some water. The protagonist declines, saying he has somewhere to go. Seems odd given the time, but he decides not to explain at the moment. Thus, Duel is left confused, not knowing where his friend is going in such a hurry. A few minutes later, in a room in the third block, a pair of sneakers opened in a box, and the man who received them asks why they are being delivered. The students responsible for the gift then explain that it is because the gang accepted them, and this is an act of appreciation. Despite understanding, Inhe says he cares more about talent than appreciation, so the student in question says it's not a problem for him either. In any case, for the sadistic smile, the gang leader asks them to do their best from now on. Right after that, Park enters the room and informs his leader that Gilsu most likely won't attend school that day. Thus, Inhe asks why, and Park wonders if it's time for them to beat him up. Unexpectedly, the gang leader changes his mind and says the situation has changed thanks to the blonde. Initially, Park is confused, not understanding his leader's plans, so it is soon explained that after defeating Duel, they proved their strength. It is said that those who knew they were weaker than the veteran are now super scared. Thus, touching people like the hero will ruin their reputations. In this case, one of the thugs asks what they should do and suggests spreading recruitment flyers for the gang around the combat arena. But Inhei immediately denies this, saying that as long as they defeat the first years as planned, it's time to move on to the next stage. In front of the boys, the third-year student Siku questions the identity of those in front of him while smoking his cigarette. In this case, Inhei states that he is there because he wants to have a conversation with the third-year seniors. Siku, in turn, says he has nothing to say to first-year students and questions their sanity for being there. In light of this, the group leader understands how the third-year students view him, but explains that he knows they are from the same legendary generation as his brother. After hearing this statement, Siku realizes that the little boy in front of him is the younger brother of the bastard he knew in the past. Inhei provokes the man by saying that since he was left aside by Chun, he went to hide among the seniors. Not one to back down, Siku charges at the boy, grabbing him by the neck, ready to finish him off. However, before anything happens, the gang leader explains that he's saying this because he's disappointed. He said that since then, the veteran's life had been a solitary struggle, but not anymore because he ensured the situation just changed. After hearing those words from the younger brother of the man who used to be his leader, Siku calms down considerably. Later on the school rooftop, one of the students says they need to take action in the combat arena. The referee informs the student council president that many students are using the rules to undermine the foundation of the place. Thus, he says they cannot just watch the immature actions of the first years, especially since one of those involved is Kang's younger brother. In this case, though disappointed, Chung says that despite the rules being abused, rules are rules, which makes the referee even more irritated. Then to end this discussion, the president explains that unfortunately, even if he decides to resolve the situation, the combat arena will no longer be the same as before. After hearing his superior's speech, the student has no more arguments to oppose him, so he decides to remain silent. With that, suddenly a call from first-year student Lee Gilsu is requested on Chun's cell phone. Then Chong warns the boy again not to contact him until he can achieve a high score. Noticing the protagonist lying on the ground, he asks if by any chance he had given up. However, Gilsu responds that he called Chong for a reason, because he had already achieved a high score, asking Chong to teach him the next step. Sometime later, our protagonist was running and confused, wondered where he was going. Meanwhile, the protagonist was having a flashback of that boy from before, thinking that he needed to get even stronger. A little later, he ends up returning to that training dummy to practice a bit, thinking that the only thing he could do, since he had nothing else, was work hard to remove those weak punches. And if he struck it tens of thousands of times, surely he could manage it. Remembering Chong's words that he needed to hit hard enough for the machine to register the punch, as only then it would prove that he could inflict damage on his opponent. For this reason, he needed to find his own way. Thus, for the boy, he lacked weight and strength, so it would be better to widen his stance more than theirs. Soon after, he prepares to attack again, delivering an upward punch to the training dummy, and as a result, manages to score number 3. Sometime later, night had already fallen and yet Jiho was still training. Thus, his score was constantly increasing. Gilsu, still not giving up, had bloody hands, where he finally achieved a score higher than 9,000. Then we return to the present, where the protagonist was asking the man to teach him the next lesson. Surprised, Chong mentions that it was faster than expected. Then the boy responds that he had no choice because he didn't have time to stay in a place like that. Next, Chong says they will move on to the next training, but first he should prepare because it was going to be very difficult. What? At the same moment, the protagonist ends up fainting, and the man says that rest is also part of the training. Sometime later, Park was in the arena asking what all that was about, because it wasn't even half of the people who usually came, asking if everyone was afraid. But at that moment, a person enters the arena questioning who was afraid, stating that he needed to teach them since he had no respect. Park, surprised, thinks that he was from the student council. The man says he hated that dragon tattoo on his arm from the first time he saw it, and that was a good reason to wake up and fight. Meanwhile, the judge from afar was observing that conversation, thinking he couldn't just watch anymore. Then another person appears entering the arena, asking what was happening with that atmosphere, and he had heard that the fight arena was fun nowadays, so for that reason, he had come to visit. But now that he had arrived, he was seeing a second-year student trying to fight against a first-year one. For that reason, he needed to tighten things up a bit. The judge, realizing it was Suku, asks how he dared come to that place. Then the young man says he had gone to the fight arena to fight as he was also a second-year high school student. However, the judge asks him to leave that place as he was the one who caused that incident, but still, he had come to the arena again to fight. Nevertheless, the young man asks him to just forget what had happened, as they should enjoy the fight. Then another boy appears asking why he was acting so strictly, as there were fewer people in that place, so it was good to have more and more. Observing the boy, he realizes it was Kan. Then the boy asks if the judge was really afraid. A little later, the scene cuts to a place under construction, and Gilsu asks what kind of training he was trying to do in such a dark place, because that place was very strange, as it even seemed like a ghost could appear at any moment. Then Chong mentions that he had found his way correctly. The protagonist, in turn, asks what kind of training it was going to be. Then the man asks if he had ever heard of the Sixth Gate from the past, because the high schools in the area once battled for the title of being the strongest, and the school that won a crushing victory was the Sixth Gate. And after the Six Gates dominated that territory, the other schools spread to their own territories, and where they were now was the territory of the bastards called Jinsang. Although the fights between schools no longer occurred, if members from another school invaded their territory, it would be treated as a clear provocation. Shortly after, Chong seems to close a gate, mentioning that the one on the other side was open. For that reason, he should try to get out using his own strength. Additionally, there was no better experience than a real fight, so immediately after he begins to leave, leaving the protagonist alone. Some people seem to hear voices and arrive at the location, asking what that bastard was talking so loudly about in their territory. Getting off the bike, they wonder who that person was and if, by chance, he was a lost member of the Six Gates. It is then revealed that the group was the same one that had intimidated the protagonist before. The other man asks if he knew that this was a completely different situation from before. He was very happy to see Gilsu in that place. For that reason, he should be afraid of going alone. So now he was going to end his life, asking if by any chance he was scared and why that idiot was just standing there. However, the boy is surprised because the protagonist seemed to be mumbling something. Immediately after, the protagonist seems to start taking his battle stance. Then in the same instant, he delivers a punch to that guy, and without even letting him react, he throws another punch. Everyone around is completely surprised by what the protagonist had done, as he had practically knocked out that man in just a few seconds. Pleased, the protagonist thinks that now everything was working. Meanwhile, in the battle arena, a man was saying that he accepted his defeat, begging to be spared. The other man, in turn, says that if he had known the fight arena was so fun, he would have come earlier. Then the judge appears, asking him not to exaggerate, as he should fight someone on his level before starting to get arrogant. Letting go of the man, the guy says there was a lot to discuss, asking what they should do now that they were the only ones left because even a few students who were there had left. The arena's rules had been abused, and even Q's son, who keeps a low profile, had shown up. So they probably left in case they got hit, wondering if it was all part of Kang's plan. Then Kang asks if his senior really wanted to fight, questioning if they shouldn't arrange a fight in a proper place and not in the fighting arena, since that combat arena was empty, asking if there was no longer a need to protect him. Next, the man asks to send a message to Chong, saying they would go to a real place and not that childish play that was the arena. The scene then cuts again to the protagonist finishing off that man, thinking he really enjoyed doing that. Charging at the protagonist, the other guy asks how he dared to use his fists in his territory, throwing a punch at the protagonist's face. However, it had no effect. Gilsu, in turn, mentions that his punches were nothing special, and immediately after, he gives a hard slap that makes the boy fall to the ground. Then, in a matter of seconds, he punches the other guy too, causing him to fall to the ground as well. Confused, the man wonders what had happened to the protagonist in such a short period of time, questioning if he was really the same person he had seen last time. Then that girl from before shows up, calling the protagonist an idiot, asking if he knew what he had just done. Then several people start to appear behind her, and the woman mentions that he was screwed. Next, the man asks why a kid from the Six Gates was in that place. Surprised, the protagonist asks how many people were there. For that reason, it would be impossible to fight them head-on, and for that reason, he needed to add something else. Immediately after, the girl says he had no way out. Then at the same moment, Gilsu grabs one of the motorcycles, thinking that if he couldn't fight them directly, he would have to use a tool. Thus, he starts accelerating, thinking it was much harder to drive than he thought. Then the guys start laughing at the protagonist, saying he was an idiot for trying to do that. But at the same moment, the protagonist throws the motorcycle, asking if he ever said he was going to ride it, telling everyone to get out of his way. Managing to evade the group, Gilsu starts running like a madman, thinking that if he fought those bastards one by one, he could win, but that number was too large to go against all at once. But at the same moment, he seems to get an idea. Looking up, he sees a building, thinking that even though it wasn't the fight arena, it could be useful. Meanwhile, that group was still chasing the protagonist. At the top of the stairs, the protagonist was provoking them, asking them to come up. The other man, in turn, says he must have hit his head while running to save his life. Because now there was nowhere left for the boy to run, they advanced for the protagonist. However, at that very moment, he ends up receiving a fatal blow, and right after, another boy rushes at Gilsu. He also gets hit hard, and both, unconscious, begin to fall on top of their friends. The protagonist, in turn, thinks that on a narrow staircase he could fight them one by one, and thus he could be able to defeat them all and get out of that place. But at that moment, something seems to hit the protagonist, and immediately after, a boy appears from above, kicking him in the head, which causes him to fall down the stairs. Irritated, the boy says that he was eating a little when a guy from the Six Gates appeared in his sight. Gilsu, in turn, is surprised, thinking that he had never considered the possibility of someone being above him in that location. Then immediately after, he charges at that boy, who within seconds ends up taking a punch from him, thinking that his strength was on a completely different level compared to everyone else. Next, the boy says he would give him 10 minutes to finish him off and then hand him back. Then, immediately after, everyone begins attacking the protagonist. Meanwhile, the boy is still resisting strongly, thinking that fighting those men was leading nowhere. Meanwhile, that boy thinks that the new first-year kids are unreliable since none of those men could deal with a single boy. However, the guy is surprised and the protagonist, charging at him, says he doesn't need 10 minutes. Then, immediately after, Gilsu headbutts that guy, who immediately falls down the stairs. Irritated, the boy asks how they couldn't stop just one guy because if they couldn't catch the protagonist, everyone was going to be in trouble that day. Meanwhile, our protagonist was running away, thinking he had finally made it and now just had to reach the back entrance, and right after, he finds the location. However, there were still some concerns as a motorcycle was following him, and right after, it blocks the protagonist's way toward the gate. Then the guy gets off the bike, asking if it was the protagonist who had beaten up his sweetheart, surprised because he really couldn't believe it, asking if the protagonist was also handsome, mentioning that he liked cuter things. Not understanding anything, Gilsu wonders what that man was talking about. Then that guy's henchmen show up. Next, the man asks if they had lost to that boy, asking them to wait a moment because he was going to show them a little love as well. However, the boy asks to let him handle that bastard. Then immediately after, the guy with a threatening look tells them not to touch Gilsu. Observing the situation, Gilsu thinks that he was the boss of ginseng school. Moreover, he was shorter than him and less muscular than Chong. For that reason, Gilsu felt capable of defeating him, charging at the guy, thinking he shouldn't waste time, and right after he tries to land a left jab on him, which the guy easily dodges. The man in turn says that the boy was really cute for trying to attack him first. Then immediately after, he grabs the protagonist, who is completely surprised by his strength. He is then thrown to the ground. Grabbing Gilsu by the collar, the guy says that he didn't need to rest yet, asking him to play a little more, throwing our boy to the ground again. Desperate, the boy thinks he is going to die. Once again, the man grabs Gilsu, asking if he still hadn't passed out, asking him to fight a little more. At that moment, the protagonist places his foot on the man's face, asking why a short guy like him kept calling others handsome, stating that he was an idiot. Immediately after, the guy becomes completely enraged by what he just heard. The other boy, watching the situation, thinks that the protagonist really wanted to die as he had heard that his senior was bullied when he was younger for being small. And from that day on, no matter what, no one could say the word cute. Gilsu in turn wonders why the atmosphere had changed. Then immediately after, he tries to punch the boy, but at that moment he ends up being immobilized. And the other boy says that he would take the protagonist to hell. Desperate, the protagonist thinks he couldn't breathe and couldn't move either. Then that guy thanks him for his meal. Next, the other man says that the madness was about to begin. His move was called the Triangle of Shock and Hell, and anyone caught in that technique couldn't use their arms or legs while facing him. Next, the boy asked the protagonist if he thought he was handsome. Gilsu in turn thinks that this was on a completely different level compared to any fight he had ever faced. And for that reason, he thought he might really die. Then immediately after, the boy's group is surprised because the protagonist simply managed to lift that man, thinking that he couldn't just stand there. But at that moment, the guy makes a move, going directly behind the protagonist, where immediately after he starts choking him from behind, saying that the record in ginseng was 7 seconds to stay conscious. Realizing the situation, Gilsu, on the verge of passing out, thinks that he has to hold on and can't afford to rest, because he didn't want to lose to idiots like them yet. Then immediately after, the boy seems to pass out. Letting go of the protagonist, the man mentions that he had been a lot of fun. The other young man in turn says that, luckily, it seemed that he had lost interest in them. For that reason, they needed to take advantage of this opportunity to leave. Meanwhile, Gilsu was being dragged by that man. At the same time, the boy was still conscious, saying that the survival game before being transferred was a game his bullies used to play, where they bet on how long he could last finding entertainment in his pain. And in that situation, the only way he survived was by using his finger to protect his neck. Grabbing a stone, the boy says that this was the method of survival for the weak. Charging at the man, he says this would be his final blow, stating that he was born from the pain he endured in his past, hitting that stone squarely on the guy's face. Starting to run, he feels pleased because he had managed to knock that man down. For that reason, now he just needed to reach that gate. However, that man had not yet passed out, quickly charging at the protagonist. But at that moment, a fearsome aura suddenly appeared in front of the two. It is then revealed that Chong had arrived to help the protagonist, stating that if anyone attacked the protagonist, it would be considered an attack on all 6 gates. Immediately after, that guy says he was lucky because he really wanted to fight Chong, stating that the era of the 6 was ginseng's. Then, in a matter of seconds, Chong punches the guy in the face, saying that it was expected from ginseng's kids as they hadn't progressed at all, and they only acted properly when they were hit. But even so, Gilsu had already moved past that stage. For that reason, the only thing left was the final step, asking him to meet on the rooftop the next day. The next morning, the protagonist seemed to be going to school peacefully. However, complications arose right in the morning, with the protagonist telling a guy to go to the arena after school, because an idiot like him was going to die that day. Meanwhile, Park asks Jin if his arm was really broken, saying that he was very weak, or if he was just pretending because he was afraid to fight again. asking him not to just stand there and to at least say something because he had been boasting earlier. Pushing the boy, he says that he should finally know his place. Then immediately after, he starts squeezing the broken arm, surprised because it was really broken, saying that he had only stepped on it by accident. Jin, in turn, asks if he knew the school's rules. However, Park responds that he doesn't care about them. Then, immediately after, the protagonist appears to block the attack, thinking that, unfortunately, there was no more time to train with Chang, asking Park to go to the arena after all of this. Park, in turn, is surprised because the protagonist had really shown up again, asking what had happened to his arm and if he was really training alone. However, immediately after, the protagonist slaps Park's hand away, saying that he would have a match in the arena fight later. Bursting into laughter, Park says he didn't know where that burst of courage was coming from, but it seemed very amusing, asking if he really wanted to take a beating in the arena. But even so, it was exciting, saying that they would meet there. For that reason, he would show him what the fight arena was like nowadays. Then, immediately after, the boy leaves. Sometime later, Chang was waiting on the rooftop for Gilsu. Then that judge from before shows up, asking if he knew who had gone to the fight arena earlier, because Sun, along with Kang, had gone to the arena, saying that he had warned that if they let things continue, the situation would only get worse. However, Chang starts laughing, saying that it was very interesting. The boy, disbelieving, says that the fight arena was on the verge of destruction, yet the man was saying that. However, Chang responds that the reason they could compete in the fight arena wasn't because they suppressed their power or created perfect rules, but it was quite the opposite. Because just like a polluted river purifies itself, the fight arena would change only because of the power of a single person. The situation would be completely different. Meanwhile, a group of people was discussing how Gilsu had challenged Park to a fight. Park, in turn, states that he suddenly showed up just to show off. Additionally, it seemed like he had been training and even had his arms bandaged. For that reason, he was going to make sure to finish him off properly. However, Kang didn't seem very confident about it. Park, in turn, asked the boy if there was a problem. Then Kang reveals that if they kept messing with that boy, it wouldn't add anything, and for that reason, they should have focused on taking down Chang first. But Park tells him not to worry because he was going to leave one of those arms permanently immobile. Then Kang asks what would happen if others thought someone like him could challenge them so easily. For that reason, all their efforts to take down Park's arena could be in vain. And because of that, Park needed to win perfectly. So he should never let his guard down, because that boy is nothing more than a persistent youngster. Meanwhile, a group of people was talking to the protagonist, asking what he had in mind to challenge Park to a fight, because even Jin couldn't beat him, so the protagonist had no chance. Meanwhile, Gilsu thinks he had acted on impulse, wondering if it was right to disobey his senior's words like that, since he had missed his training session. Then immediately after, Jin asked to cancel that fight, because even if he had been training with Chang, it was still too dangerous to fight Park, mentioning that since he had just transferred, he didn't know anything, because Park was a guy who did all kinds of nasty things to people outside of school. And the result was clear, just like with Jin, so he shouldn't get involved in that fight, because after recovering, he could take that man down. However, Gilsu wouldn't accept that because Jin had gotten hurt while fighting to protect him, stating that it had happened to him in the hallway that morning. It had been happening to the protagonist his whole life, because he was being ignored and turned into a spectacle for other people, as if he were a clown in a circus. Because of this, he didn't want to be like those people, and his first opponent had to be Park, who wanted to finish the fight since he couldn't make it to the cafeteria. And it didn't matter how dangerous it was because he was ready to do it. Thus, night eventually arrives. Meanwhile, a group of people was discussing a rumor, and that the protagonist had completed special training, and for that reason, they were eager for that fight between Park and the protagonist. Meanwhile, a huge crowd was heading toward the arena to witness that incredible fight. Inside the place, the arena was completely packed. The other boy is surprised, as it was the first time he had seen so many people in the arena. Then Jin responds that the impact of the protagonist's 2 previous fights had been very significant, because the real fun of the arena wasn't about being strong or weak. It was just a matter of being able to stand out on the others. Meanwhile, Park was stressed because the protagonist hadn't arrived yet, so the people next to him end up assuming that the protagonist had run away. However, Park replies that if Gilsu ran away, that would be even better. Meanwhile, Chang coldly observed the situation from above, and the people next to him were frustrated because the fight hadn't started yet. Then Park asked to finish it already, as Gilsu wasn't going to show up. But immediately after, the other boy hears a noise. Then right after, a hooded figure appears, and everyone around was completely shocked at who it was, because the protagonist had shown up still with his shaved head. Then immediately after, Park starts laughing at him, asking what had happened if he had shaved his head to make some kind of resolution. However, while everyone was laughing at the protagonist, Chang was watching him. Then right after, he gives a slight smile. Entering the arena, Gilsu asked them to laugh as much as they wanted, because afterward, they wouldn't be able to laugh anymore. Park, in turn, says he's going to beat the protagonist down. Then immediately after, Gilsu asks to see who would win that. At that moment, the referee gives the signal, and thus the fight begins. Amidst that situation, Gilsu thinks about his old friend leaving, and for that reason, he was going to win that fight, even if it meant risking his life. At that moment, the protagonist charges at Park, where immediately after he tries to throw a left jab, but Park manages to dodge it. The boy in turn says that having spirit alone is not enough. Then he lands a punch on the protagonist, stating that he would make him regret fighting without any fear. Immediately after, he starts a flurry of punches, saying it felt like hitting a punching bag. Meanwhile, Gilsu thinks that he is very strong. The speed and power both are incredibly comparable, but even so, he had already gone through worse. Right after, he tries to launch a series of attacks, but Park easily dodges them all, asking what he was trying to do. Then Park lands another punch on Gilsu. Meanwhile, the audience is completely frustrated because the protagonist isn't attacking. They wonder where all that spirit from the beginning went. The judge in the background says that it's just as expected and the outcome is unfolding as predicted. And if it continues this way, they can cheer even louder. However, Chong asks if that's really what the judge sees, because the protagonist is still very focused on the fight. Park in turn says that Gilsu takes a beating well and was truly born to be a punching bag. However, he immediately swallows his words, realizing that the boy wasn't in a defensive stance. Meanwhile, Gilsu thinks that this fight is his, apologizing to his senior as he hadn't expected he would need to train up to the final lesson. Then a flashback of him talking to Chong appears, telling the man that he couldn't stand up to Park. Right after, Chong says they should change his training plan. In a matter of seconds, the man charges at the protagonist, stating that this quick course would replace his final training. For that reason, he would have to fight Chong himself. Immediately after, he gets punched by Chong, completely surprised by what was happening. Then Chong asks if he intended to fight with his heart like that in the arena. For that reason, he needed to attack seriously. Gilsu, trying to hit Chong, realizes that nothing is effective. Chong then mentions that his attacks are too weak and that no one fights like that in the arena. Gilsu, in turn, wonders how he could get stronger after just a few training sessions. But even so, he couldn't give up, trying to throw another punch at Chong. However, he is left surprised. The man, in turn, asks if the protagonist truly wants to win. Then, Gilsu notices that his punch had landed on Chong, who continues talking, saying that if he wanted to win, he should put defense last. Meanwhile, back in the arena, everyone in the stands is completely shocked, because the protagonist is launching a chaotic flurry of blows at Park. Jin, in turn, says he thought Gilsu had given up and didn't expect him to raise his fist like that. Then, if this was the case, training with Chong didn't make any sense. Park, in turn, asks what's wrong with the protagonist, saying he's very weak, asking if he thought wildly swinging his fists like that would accomplish anything. However, immediately after, the protagonist tries to grab Park, who, while throwing him back, asks what's going on. Meanwhile, a man in the stand says that the boy will lose, but at least he'll lose with style, because that fight was truly unique. Meanwhile, Park tells the boy to stop attacking like a madman. Then, immediately after, the protagonist thinks that everything is going according to plan. Another flashback of Chong's fight appears, saying that in defense, one should take advantage of the opponent's movements. Only then would the real fight begin. It was very hard to predict the opponent's movement, but stopping still was easier. And of course, if he grabbed too hard, he would be hit by the opponent's punch. For that reason, he should just endure at that moment, stating that he had endured the training very well until now. So if there was an opportunity, he should attack. Gilsu, in turn, thinks that he couldn't raise his defense. Right after, Chong was about to punch the protagonist. But at that moment, Chong stops the attack, saying that from the beginning, the protagonist shouldn't aim for efficiency. For that reason, he should throw the opponents into chaos, because his punches would eventually find the target. Returning to the present, Gilsu manages to land a punch on Park, starting a series of attacks in that place where Park now appears to be hurt. The crowd is completely stunned, and Jin thinks that because of the chaotic punches, grabbing firmly could work. Next, Park is forced to retreat. However, for the protagonist, that didn't matter, because he can abandon his defense. For that reason, there was only one path to follow. Immediately after, he attempts to land the final blow. However, Park manages to dodge. He asks if Gilsu was trying to hit the body first and then aim for the face, but even so, it wasn't a bad plan. Meanwhile, Chong watches coldly from above, remembering the past and saying that the protagonist's training finally ended there. But even so, he should never forget the teachings, because a fight is full of surprises, and he should never give up standing tall until the end. Next, the protagonist grabs Park's head, saying he still had a chance, stating that this was also anticipated. Immediately after, he lands a punch on Park's face. Thus, his tricks finally start to work. The crowd is completely shocked by what the protagonist had done, because Gilsu managed to knock Park down in the arena. However, Park replies that this is just the beginning. The crowd goes wild as the protagonist was finally starting to fight back. Everyone begins cheering for Gilsu. However, for Park, it was just luck. He charges recklessly at the boy, who, noticing an opening, manages to land a left jab, and right after, a right hook. In a matter of seconds, Gilsu advances again towards Park, starting a series of attacks. Meanwhile, the judge, observing from above, says Gilsu is better than he appears. Chong, in turn, states that in a fight like this, energy and mental strength are the most important, because the attacks could break the opponent's concentration. Now the moment of the fight was in Gilsu's favor, Meanwhile, Jin says he doesn't know why, but Park seems a bit off. Meanwhile, Kang is watching the boy from above, remembering the man's words that all efforts to fight in the arena needed to be perfect. Returning to the present, the boy says this is very shameful. Taking a different fighting stance, he says the real fight has just begun. Noticing Park's fighting stance, the protagonist hesitates. But even so, he didn't have time for that. He needed to finish quickly, while there was still time. However, in a matter of seconds, he gets hit by a kick and is sent flying. Unable to catch his breath, he gets hit by another kick. A series of blows are launched at him. Park says that an idiot like him should know his place below that of an insect. Meanwhile, Gilsu thinks that every blow is incredibly strong and there's no opening for a counterattack. He wonders what he could do in that situation, remembering when he was talking to Jin, saying that no matter how dangerous it was, he was ready. However, Jin had warned him to be careful, because Park had something strange with his legs as his kicks reached a greater distance than normal. So if he tried to make that type of attack, he needed to be prepared. Returning to the present, Gilsu finally understands why his friend was so cautious. Approaching the protagonist, Park says that the look of fear suited him well. For that reason, he was going to finish him off once and for all. Immediately after, he starts throwing more kicks, landing all his attacks. Gilsu thinks that the way Park enjoyed his pain reminded him of his past, where he could never forget the people who tormented him, people who made his life hell for no reason. It happened because Park was just like all of them, but he couldn't afford to lose this fight. Immediately after, he uses his back to block the kick, leaving Park completely surprised by what he had just seen, because Gilsu had actually done it. Everyone in the stands was completely shocked as well. Gilsu thinks that he could be hit in that position as much as Park wanted, because he knew that position hurt less when struck. Park in turn says he's ridiculous, asking if Gilsu thought that could really stop him. So as Park throws more kicks, the protagonist uses his back to defend himself. Meanwhile, the crowd is laughing at the protagonist. Meanwhile, Jin wonders if the protagonist was very smart, because it might look silly, but the buttocks are one of the most padded parts of the body. This way, the protagonist could gather strength to continue. Meanwhile, Park was already getting tired because his attacks were no longer working. Immediately after, he tries to throw a punch at Gilsu's head, who barely manages to dodge, thinking that the kick was enough to see clearly. Jin, in turn, says that Park was gradually slowing down, mentioning that there was something strange when he fought him earlier as well, because he had stronger kicks but seemed oddly reluctant to use them, where it might be that the stronger his kick, the greater the risk. Returning to the present, Gilsu seems to be successfully dodging Park's kicks. However, in one of them, he notices something strange. Something different was on his leg. The moment Gilsu loses focus, Park lands a punch on his face, saying that the protagonist was too persistent. But now it was all over. He lands another kick to Gilsu's face, mentioning that no matter how tough he was, he wouldn't withstand his soccer kick. However, amidst all of this, Gilsu still seemed conscious, stating that Park's kick had become much slower. In that moment, he grabs Park's leg and throws him backward, saying that the sensation was strange, like being hit by an iron bar. But still, the more Park kicked, the slower he got. And during those kicks, Gilsu had noticed something. Something shiny was on his knee. At that moment, Gilsu grabs Park's clothes, revealing some kind of metal. Everyone around notices it as there was iron armor on Park's leg. Gilsu says it was no wonder Park was losing strength so quickly. Immediately, everyone around becomes completely furious at what was on Park's leg, because it was illegal. The judge in the stands suggests they should stop the fight. However, Chong tells him to wait and see, as it seemed the fight was about to end. Meanwhile, the protagonist begins a sequence of strikes, while Park is lying on the ground. Watching Park's expression, the protagonist thinks he recognized it, because it was the expression of fear in the heart with no ability to resist, just like he felt when people bullied him. However, his old self was now dead. Then, with tears on his face, he prepares to land the final blow, punching Park in the face. And finally, the fight ends and the protagonist is declared the winner. Feeling happy, Gilsu celebrates having defeated Park. Disbelieving, Park lies on the ground, wondering if he had truly been defeated, thinking that it wasn't over yet. Kang, however, is already leaving, calling Park useless. Then the crowd starts throwing things at Park, angry that he had ruined everything. Meanwhile, the protagonist stands before him. Immediately after, he extends his hand to Park, asking him to get up, mentioning that he had cheated and still lost, saying that he had wanted to have a fair fight with him, but rules were rules. So next time, they would need to settle things in a more fair manner. The judge, in turn, says that the new student was more interesting than he thought, and that he could be even more unpredictable than imagined. Another man in the stands asks if the school had sunk so low, because people had really stopped watching this kind of stupid fight, since Park couldn't even beat a small kid like that. Immediately after, Chong appears in the arena, asking what the man wanted. The man says the arena was trash, but he couldn't stand it anymore. For that reason, from that moment on, he would become the ruler, stating that he thought Chong was dead somewhere, but there he was. Taking his fighting stance, Chong says he would show the man how the arena really worked. Immediately after, a fight between the two seems about to begin. Meanwhile, the protagonist watches the situation, asking Jin who the person with Chong was. Jin replies that before the arena was created, that man had competed with Chong for the title of the strongest. Warming up, the man asks if it hadn't been a long time. Chong in turn says it brings back memories of his past, asking if the man was already scared. At that moment, the man charges at Chong, asking if he had caused all that trouble to reach that pile of trash. The crowd is completely stunned by the man's monstrous strength. However, Chong simply dodges the attack. Then the man starts a flurry of strikes at Chong, who continues to dodge. Gilsu, in turn, surprised, asks how a body could move so easily like that, wondering what would happen if Chong lost the fight. However, Jin doesn't answer the question. He only warns that if Chong loses, the arena would be dissolved and the man would return to power. The other man says Chong was always a coward, only knowing how to run, stating that his current self was completely different from before, launching another attack at Chong, who barely dodges it. But even so, a part of his chin is hit. The man in turn is pleased because he had finally landed a hit. Then immediately after, he starts a series of attacks, stating that Chong had been acting like a superior dog and asking if he was doing okay, claiming he should have taken care of him a long time ago. Gilsu is in disbelief, wondering how Zhang could possibly defeat that monster. Based on the current situation, the man was completely dominating the fight. Then the man seemed to be preparing for the final blow, saying that Chong had now lost to him. But still, Chong hadn't given up on the fight. Immediately after, Chong lands a punch on the man, saying that this was a waste of time. For that reason, it was time to end everything once and for all. He delivers a knee strike to the man's stomach. The force of the impact was so powerful that the man was sent flying out of the arena. For this reason, it could be named the most intense match ever held in that place. Afterward, Chong looks to the side and notices Park trying to escape. He says that if Park broke the rules, he deserved a punishment, telling Park to go in front of him and lie down. Sometime later, Park is on his knees in the arena, thinking that Chong was going to hit him with that iron bar. And if he was struck by a monster like Chong, he probably wouldn't survive. Then he begins begging Chong not to do it. However, without even wanting to hear anything, Chong tells him to just kneel. Park grabs Chong's knee, saying that he regretted everything, claiming that he was forced to do it. That's why he committed this crime and was just a victim in the situation. Because of that, he promised he would never act that way again. Afterward, Chong kneels down, telling him that he had asked him to lie down. With tears on his face, Park thinks that his life was over, wondering how he could survive this. Chong prepares to strike and says that if Park didn't want to be beaten, he should never act that way again. Chong begins his attack, but at the last moment, he stops his strike. Even so, Park had already wet his pants. The entire crowd bursts into laughter at the sight. Chong in turn asks if Park wasn't ashamed of doing such a thing in the arena, saying that he would spare him this time, but there wouldn't be a next time. Meanwhile, Kang in the background watches the situation. Then Chong seems ready to make a big announcement. He states that everyone saw today what a real arena looked like, and that anyone there could fight and rely on their own strength to win. However, no cheating was allowed and only justice would prevail there. But if anyone dared to provoke others outside the school arena and break the rules, worse things could happen. So before acting, they should think carefully, because only true warriors who act based on their strength and the arena's rules are respected there. And they are the ones who deserve respect in that arena and all others. Hearing that speech, the entire arena goes wild. Then Chong tells them to wait, as he truly was the leader of that arena. Sometime later, after everything had passed, Chong seemed to be training. Meanwhile, someone shows up to greet him, and it's the protagonist standing before him. Chong notices the boy and says he has nothing left to teach him, and if he came there to be trained, he should go straight home. However, the boy says he didn't come to ask for training, but just to say something. Chong in turn tells him that there's no need because he was only doing what needed to be done. Gilsu wonders why Chong was being so cold, telling him he had one more question, asking why Chong had helped him so much, because it seemed like Gilsu was the first person trained by Chong and had learned a lot from him. Chong responds that he wanted to use Gilsu to prove something to everyone, because to improve, one must train with all their strength. That's why Gilsu went through all of that. Hearing what Chong said, Park remains silent. Then the scene cuts to an arena in the middle of the fight, and every day there were always intense battles. Someone arriving at the arena says it had been a long time since they had been there, and someone else remarks that Chong had grown very quickly. However, he was still fine even without a master nearby. But even so, Chong couldn't be the same. It's then revealed that the man was the former leader of the arena. Shortly after, Kang appears to greet him. The man says he thought they would meet next time and would have good news. Then Kang mentions that there was a bastard breaking the law, and surprisingly, his strength wasn't comparable to Chong's. Back to Chong, the protagonist is thanking him for everything, thinking that he doesn't completely understand what the master was saying. But the arena returned to normal until Chong's speech happened, because his intensity was greater than imagined. Additionally, he also changed by continuously fighting through fierce battles. Thus, he truly learned how to fight, using his fists to carve his own path. He was completely drawn into the arena as a result. And due to that extraordinary atmosphere, he couldn't do anything else because when the opportunity came, he might be able to push past his limits and increasingly feel the flow of battles. Sometime later, a girl was asking why she had to test her patience, Then the man says that idiot told him to bring the girls, but even so, he was still getting beaten, warning the girl that now she would pay for it. As he was about to strike, she asked if he knew who they were. However, in a matter of seconds, he is punched by someone. Then Kang asks how he dared try to hit a woman. The other girl, observing the situation, is surprised, mentioning that the 6 gates were completely different. Gilsu, in turn, asks Mai if she's okay and if she happened to get hurt. However, the girl responds that she's fine, stating that this was nothing compared to the 6 gates training. And it was amazing because they would have been in serious trouble if not for the protagonist. Meanwhile, a boy asks why everyone is outside and if they really didn't have more rooms. The other girl, desperate, questions why he arrived so late, wondering if he knew what happened since suddenly those thugs had shown up. However, the boy is confused, saying that there was no one in that place. Meanwhile, a group of people is walking down an alley, asking if that boy was from the 6 gates, stating they had already heard of them. But even so, if they were really the 6 gates, they were sure someone else would be interested, because they would definitely make him pay for what he did. Sometime later, Mai is walking beside the protagonist, asking how long he had been training, because he fought really well. Gilsu, in turn, says that calling it training was a bit inadequate, as he had gone through many different things. Then Mai says that thanks to Chang's training, she could finally protect herself. Meanwhile, the protagonist thinks she really was the sister of that monster, stating that he owed her brother a lot as he couldn't adapt well after transferring. For that reason, her brother had helped him a lot. The girl, in turn, is surprised, asking if the guy her brother had been talking about was him. Gilsu, also surprised, asks if her brother had mentioned him, supposing that the person Chang had mentioned was probably his sister, thinking that knowing the girl had heard everything was a bit embarrassing, as it could ruin his image. Immediately after, the girl hands him her phone, saying that when her brother told her about him, she found it very interesting. For that reason, she couldn't believe it was the protagonist. Because of that, they should at least exchange contacts. Then Gilsu ends up giving her his number. The scene then cuts to a construction site where someone inside appears to be getting beaten by a group of people. With a hood over their head, the person is begging for their life as they can't breathe. The other man says he was sure he had told him that if he wanted to live, he should return the money. However, the boy replies that he didn't have a cent and would do anything to pay. The other man asks if he would really do anything. For that reason, he should become a player, as he had mentioned last time. Then the boy replies that he would do it, begging them to stop. Standing up, the man says that if you borrow money from someone, you should pay it back even if it costs your life. Standing up, another man mentions there was a girl who dared to touch the neighborhood gang. For that reason, they should give her a proper lesson. But immediately after, the other man slaps the boy, asking if he had even been beaten by a woman. However, the boy responds that wasn't the case. Irritated, the man asks how he dared disgrace the gang's name. The other boy, pleading, says it wasn't a woman. They got into a fight with one of the 6 gates because they had been attacked by one of their members. If it weren't for them, there wouldn't have been a problem. Smirking, the boy responds that this sounds fun. Meanwhile, Jim, along with his colleagues, is walking through the school. The guy, frustrated, responds that everything was Jim's fault. If it weren't for him, they wouldn't have to fight in the arena. Meanwhile, Gilsu seemed to be on his phone talking to someone, and the person he was talking to was Mei. Surprised, the boy comments that she was really cute. Looking over at Sarah Loto, he sees someone begging for forgiveness, saying they'd do anything and were sure they'd be a great help. Looking to the side, he realizes it was Park kneeling. Kang, in turn, asked if he didn't think his existence was a nuisance, pointing out that there was no place for a man who wet himself in the middle of the arena. And if Kang were in his position, he would have already given up on everything. Leaning on the protagonist, Jim suggests they leave the place quickly, as nothing good comes from getting involved with those people. Gilsu, in turn, questions why thugs like Park would want to be alongside Kang, because there was no way out when walking with a group of bullies like that. His friend responds that it's true in school. However, in real life, it was very different, because there was a well-known gang that wasn't from that area, an established company, but you could think of it as a hidden organization, so big that they even had connections with the police and politicians. And the second son of the head of that gang was Kang. So you could say that boy was born into a wealthy family, and because of his background, thugs like Park wanted to be under him. Gilsu, surprised, thinks that he didn't know the neighborhood was scarier than before. Meanwhile, Mai was walking through the streets at night, mentioning that her part-time job had ended later than she expected, so she only slept when she got home. Suddenly, someone starts running after her. Then a girl with her clothes torn approaches Mai, begging for help. She says a gang attacked her, and when she refused, they kept chasing her. Mai tells her not to worry and that she will report them to the police. The other girl says that if they kept running, they'd be caught quickly. For that reason, they should hide in that alley. Then, another man appears, saying that he thought she was just running, but now they found someone even prettier. So they were even luckier now. Mai demands that they stop, saying the girl had already said no. The man questions if she really didn't like it. Mai, confused, asks what he meant by that. At that moment, the girl gets shocked with a taser. The girl responds that she hated it and really didn't like dumb men. But what she enjoyed most was intimidating people like Mai. Lying on the ground, Mai asks who she is and why she's with those people. Immediately after, another group of people appears saying that apparently Mei was quite good at fighting, asking if they were really going to have fun. The scene then cuts to a prison. Kang tells someone not to worry as he has a plan and would do what he could. If it didn't work within the school, they could use another method. Then another man says that only those who've experienced a leash themselves can put one on someone else. Because of that, Kang needed to know his place. He adds that his father said he would try to help him, so he thought he'd be out in a few months. For that reason, Kang shouldn't ruin the family's reputation and should stay behind the scenes. Once he's out, everything will be resolved anyway. Kang in turn responds that he understood the situation but still seemed reluctant. The scene then cuts to one of the protagonist's friends saying that something incredible had finally happened to him because he was invited on a date with a girl over the weekend, and for that reason he needed advice from the two. Gilsu responds that he's never done anything like that, and Jim responds that he has to train at the gym on weekends. The boy in turn says that he's been feeling really good that week because the girl had asked him out first. Jim in turn responds that he's lost count of how many times the boy had gotten his hopes up. Then Gilsu says that if the boy was asking so desperately, they should help him somehow, because they never knew when a real signal might happen. Realizing he had no other choice, the boy says he'll buy them burgers as a reward. Sometime later, the three are at a restaurant. The guy wonders why he's so nervous, and Jim asks how many drinks he's had. Gilsu, observing the situation, thinks it's the first time he's seen the boy so desperate. Then suddenly, he's surprised to see Mei walking into the restaurant. Disbelieving, Gilsu wonders if it was really her. Then immediately after, the boy calls out to Mei. However, it seemed like it wasn't her, as it was the other girl beside her who greeted them, apologizing for being so late. Afterward, the boy introduces the protagonist along with his other friend. Meanwhile, Gilsu supposes that this was the girl his friend was interested in. Then the girl introduces herself, saying her name was Mei. The protagonist introduces himself as well, thinking she was very beautiful. The other girl asks how their friend was doing at school, saying she was curious since she only saw him at the gym. The boy responds that it was always the same. However, Gilsu jumps in, saying that he never listened in class and only slept during them. Gilsu, meanwhile, thinks that it seemed like everyone was having fun. However, he still couldn't participate in the conversation. Then Mei seems to notice the protagonist being quiet. She calls out to him, asking if he didn't like to talk. However, the boy responds that wasn't it. Mei, in turn, says that she also didn't like too much noise, stating that she always felt left out whenever they went anywhere. The protagonist replies that he always felt the same way. Changing the conversation, Mei asks if they should head somewhere else, claiming she knew a karaoke spot that could be interesting to visit. Meanwhile, Gilsu feels embarrassed, because just a moment ago he had been feeling comfortable. Sometime later, everyone arrives at the karaoke spot, but still his friend seems frustrated about something. Immediately after, he grabs Jim by the shoulder, asking the girls if they could go in first, because the three of them needed to use the restroom. Jim, in turn, asks what's going on, but his friend responds that Jim should be asking that, questioning why he was suddenly being so honest, and why he was getting along so well with his friend. Gilsu, in turn, says it seemed like they wanted to have a long conversation. For that reason, he would head into the karaoke first, so they wouldn't be worried. As he leaves, Gilsu says they always bickered when they were together. Meanwhile, he's thinking about Mei's face, apparently smitten, saying that her name was really beautiful. Immediately after, a man asks what's wrong with her, saying she should relax a bit more, telling her to join her friends since there were two more guys in the next room. Shortly after, the protagonist appears, asking what the man was doing. The other guy asks if she had a companion, and if that guy wasn't just an idiot, questioning why she wouldn't talk to him and was sticking with an idiot like that. However, the girl just asks to be let go. At that moment, the protagonist charges at the man, but immediately after, the girl grabs the man by his shirt collar, saying she was going to break his face, and she manages to throw him to the ground. Gilsu, in turn, is completely shocked by what he saw. The girl responds that she had been anxious ever since that man grabbed Mei's hand. Noticing Gilsu, the girl says he didn't need to do anything, stating that Mei might seem delicate, but she was actually quite scary. Immediately after, the man tries to punch the girl. Continuing the conversation, the other girl mentions that from what she heard, Mei's brother had taught her self-defense since she was young, and she was so good that most men couldn't even compete with her, supposing she was Chang's sister, one of the 6 gates. Gilsu, in turn, is completely astonished by what he heard. It's then revealed that the girl was the younger sister of his mentor. Returning to the present, Jaehu says they should have fun. The other guy says that she was making a big mistake if she thought she would be left alone after messing with their group, because now she was really going to regret it. Watching the man, Jimmy thinks that he was probably the one who fought in the karaoke fight. Then the other girl asks how the tease was and if it was electrifying. Jaehu responds that it could get a lot more electrifying than that. At that moment, the girl tries to get up, but even so, she has no strength. But within seconds, she barely manages to dodge an attack. Surprised, Jaehu says she could still move. The other woman is also surprised, saying that Mei could still move even after being hit with that shock. For that reason, they should use it a few more times. Then immediately after, another electric shock is delivered. The girl warns that if Mei had stayed still, it would have ended with just one blow. but now she was completely worn out. He stands up from the girl and asks what Jaehyoo was going to do because if he handed her over, she could teach her a good lesson. Then Jaehyoo responds that she was a very useful bitch, asking to tie her up and take her to his hideout. However, at that very moment, someone seemed to be walking towards them, and that other guy seemed to recognize the person standing in front of him. Then within seconds, he ends up receiving a fatal blow. Jaehyoo, in turn, asks what had happened. Then it's revealed that it was the protagonist, completely frustrated, thinking that if he had been faster, it wouldn't have happened. 30 minutes earlier, the protagonist was calmly walking down the street. Taking out his phone, he wonders what that girl could be doing at that moment, where shortly after, he questions what the girl was doing via text. Completely surprised as the girl responded very quickly, and she replies that at that moment, she was returning to her work. At the same moment, he ends up being surprised, because he ends up receiving a very strange message. Returning to the present, Gilsu thinks he had many suspicions about going to that place because of her strange message, but he ended up facing that situation. Shortly after, the man, completely frustrated, points out that it had been that man from the 6 gates they had talked about. Jaehyoo, in turn, says that they had already taken the first step, stating that it seemed like those bastards from the 6 gates were really impatient. Completely irritated, Gilsu says they had messed with the wrong person. For that reason, he's going to kill them all. Then the other guy charges at the protagonist, questioning what he could do alone. Shortly after, Gilsu manages to dodge the blow. Thus, he ends up landing a fatal punch on that fat guy. Then 2 people begin to advance toward him. But even so, the protagonist easily dodges them, managing to take down both at once, thinking they were definitely weaker compared to the 6 gates. That's why it didn't matter how many came at him, they were nothing compared to him. But at that very moment, he ends up receiving a quick kick and barely manages to dodge. Jaehyoo, in turn, says that he's always been curious about the 6 gates. Then, immediately after, he grabs a metal bar and starts delivering several blows toward the protagonist, who with difficulty was dodging, thinking that man was very fast. However, he ends up noticing an opening and starts preparing to kick the man, asking who he was to judge others when he didn't even have any skill. Kicking the boy, Jaehyoo barely managed to defend the attack, mentioning that he was very aggressive. However, Gilsu responds that he was just getting started, asking if he couldn't fight without a wooden baton, so he should fight honestly. At that moment, that guy puts his foot in front of the protagonist, and as a consequence, he ends up tripping. However, he ends up falling onto something soft. Jaehyoo, in turn, says that dealing with the protagonist was more complicated than expected. That's why the girl should take care of him since he was so annoying. Then it's revealed that Gilsu had fallen on top of that woman. Completely embarrassed, he replies that it wasn't on purpose. The girl, in turn, says it was very cute how embarrassed he got. Noticing the girl with a taser in her hand, he thinks they probably used it on Mai, and right after that, the girl charges at the protagonist with a taser in hand. Gilsu, in turn, wonders how he could avoid that attack. But at that very moment, Mai ends up getting up and manages to take that taser from the girl's hand. In disbelief, the woman says she was sure she had knocked Mai down, questioning what had happened. Then the girl replies that earlier she had received something interesting, because when Jaehyoo had hit her, a piece of wood had broken off. Thus, she managed to use that piece to nullify the effects of the shock. Jaehyoo, in turn, gets very irritated with the girl, asking if she couldn't finish things the right way. Returning to Gilsu, he asks if the girl was okay, and she replies that thanks to him, she had time to recover. Thus, the two end up forming their fighting stance to start the battle. Jaehyoo then replies that he wasn't going to make a big scene, but even so, it would end that way, asking if they thought that without the taser, it would make any difference. But within seconds, he ends up receiving a punch in the face from the protagonist, saying that he would teach him what would happen when he crossed the line. Returning to Mai, the girls seem to be confronting the other woman, and so both of them form their fighting stances to start the battle. And Mai responds that the girl should have done things the right way if she wanted her to stay quiet. However, right after, the girl says that this is why defeating bitches like her was so much fun. Returning to Gilsu, the boy already seemed to have defeated Jaehyoo. However, it didn't seem to be the end, as the man asks if that was all he had, because now they were really going to start the real game. Immediately after, he appears placing something unknown in his mouth. Thus, he quickly charges at the boy, delivering a punch to him which he barely manages to defend. However, the second one slips past his defense. Then Jaehyoo responds that he had already studied his fighting style. For that reason, he couldn't be beaten anymore. In the midst of this, Gilsu wonders how he could have gained so much power so suddenly. Jaehyoo, in turn, asks if he understood the situation because he wasn't speaking like before. Meanwhile, Gilsu was still in disbelief as he had come face to face with a monster like that, saying that he was really very lucky, because that was his favorite type of opponent. At the same moment, he grabs the man by the neck. Thus, he begins delivering a series of attacks on him, and in the same instant, he strikes his head against the man's, and a close quarters battle begins to unfold, leaving Jaehyoo completely surprised by the situation. Gilsu, in turn, asks if he had mentioned that he was curious about the 6 gates. Then the boy responds that this was a level 1 punch. At the very moment Jaehyoo receives the punch, he ends up flying. While the guy is lying on the ground, the protagonist says that he shouldn't try to face a former failure with just his courage. Remembering that before charging at the protagonist, the man had eaten something. But putting that aside, he really thinks about what was most important and wonders where Mai was along with that other woman. However, when he looks to the side, he realizes that Mai had already taken care of everything, thinking that when he saw her, she really seemed to be Chang's sister. Then the girl grabs the collar of the other woman's shirt. She asks why she was doing something so dirty like that. Desperate, the woman says she didn't know as she had nothing to do with the Baksan group and was only doing it for the money. Gilsu, in turn, becomes thoughtful about that group as he had already been through a situation like that, questioning what that group was and why they would pay money to do something so horrendous. The woman, in turn, asks if they really didn't know about it. Beginning to tell the story, the girl responds that it happened half a year ago, because the Baksan group is a high school association that suddenly appeared in Jumyang, and its influence was too great to just call them a gang, as even the most notorious gangs crawled to them. Although there were some violent gangs in that area, the group's growth was truly terrifying. Then, Gilsu asks if there was any association of theirs in high school. However, the girl responds that she didn't know about that, but the objective was because of the 6 gates. Remembering Jaeho's words that if they turned some of the kids from the 6 gates into players, they might have a chance to join the 5 dragons. Returning to the present, Gilsu asks if their goal was the 6 gates. Because, although the Baksan group had taken over most schools, they still hadn't made the 6 gates part of them. Standing up, the girl replies that she had said everything she knew and didn't know anything else, so she was leaving. But at that moment, Mei pulls her back, questioning where she thought she was going, stating that their conversation wasn't over yet. Sometime later, the protagonist, along with Mei, was walking down the street, apologizing because he couldn't believe that it happened to her since it involved her school. However, Mei responds that she was fine, so he shouldn't apologize. Besides, she also had a connection with the 6 gates, and it was a blood bond that could never be broken. And in addition, it could have happened eventually, even if not on that day. Gilsu, in turn, feels apprehensive, responding that even with everything that had happened, he was still relieved, because no matter what the Baksan group did, it wouldn't be able to defeat the 6 gates as long as Chang stood tall. Moreover, the guys who fought that day were very strong. Then Mei confirms that it was true, as her brother was on another level, asking if Gilsu wasn't strong himself, thanking him for the help as he had already helped her twice. Next, the scene cuts to another location, and Jaeho seemed to be getting scolded by someone. An unknown man says that his problem was that he didn't know his place, which is why he always did something useless. Jaeho, in turn, replies that he was very sorry for that, as he had only done it to have that place conquered. Right after that, the man places his foot on Jaeho's face. He replies that even if someone like him hadn't interfered with the plan to take over that school, everything would already be in motion. For that reason, starting from that day, Jaeho would be moved to a player. Jaeho, in turn, begins to beg with tears in his eyes, pleading not to do it. However, the man replies that it would be fun to watch him in that state. For that reason, he will see him in the Colosseum. Meanwhile, a guy looking at a group of people says that they all seem like losers, asking how they had the nerve to run away from home, questioning if they all wanted to participate in the heavenly wind. The other boy replies yes, stating that it had been a month since they ran away and heard that meals and lodging would be provided there. At that moment, the boy ends up receiving a punch, which sends him flying into the wall. Another man laughs in his face, asking if he thought he was going to get all of that, questioning if they thought they were a charity group. Then everyone around starts running desperately, apologizing for what happened, and the man says they had no loyalty, much less vigor, stating that there were no strong people these days, and that those guys had no talent. Then the other guy says that it was because of the influence of the Baksan group, and for that reason, there were no longer any truly useful people. The other man, in turn, says that they could no longer remain as just a simple family, so they should gain more influence. Shortly after, a man appears, saying that he seemed to be out of energy. At that moment, it is revealed that the guy was Park, asking how that could be happening with a heavenly wind. Thus, 2 people charge at the boy, asking if he was crazy and how he dared to go to that place. Park mentions that he was also interested in having an interview and was on another level compared to the other people who had left. Standing up, the other man says that he really couldn't contain himself, asking what reason he could have to recruit a guy who had abandoned them, stating that just his personality was enough to disqualify him. Park, in turn, says that he was also aware of his mistakes, and for that reason wasn't asking to come back for nothing. Therefore, he was prepared to do anything, even a crappy job. Then the man seems to give a smile, asking if that was true. The next day, Gilsu says that he had overdone it yesterday, and for that reason, he was very tired, so he should go to the school clinic and get some medication. While heading to the place, a group of people was talking to Park, saying that he was going through a hard time, and that it happens sometimes, so he had a cold side. For that reason, they were thinking about recruiting him again, and if they asked in the right way, he wouldn't refuse. Park, in turn, asked them to stop talking nonsense and get straight to the point, asking why they were acting that way all of a sudden. Approaching the boy, the guy says that his personality was very serious, mentioning that he had heard he got along well with the pretty people during his time in the Heavenly Wind, and since they are so stupid, they could have fun with them, which is why he wanted Park to introduce them to him. As he starts to walk away, Park replies that he didn't want to get involved with that. The other guy then says he was just trying to help him, asking why he was ignoring him. At that moment, he throws a can of Coca-Cola at him. However, within seconds, Park kicks it back toward the man, telling him not to be mistaken because he got along with them only because of the Gangman clan, asking if they really thought they could treat him that way after he quit. Then the other guy asks if Inhei knew about that. Park, pointing his finger, asks what was the point of going to a stupid school like that, so he should just stay there while sucking up to Kang. Sometime later, Park was calmly walking, thinking that he didn't give a damn about those people. Then someone calls out to the boy. Gilsu appears, asking the young man to wait for a moment, asking why he did that and if it was because of what happened in the arena. Because if that was the case, he could make up for it by fighting again in the arena, but the right way. Then Park grabs the boy by the collar of his shirt, telling him to watch his back at night because he was going to kill him outside. Irritated, the young man then starts to walk away, saying that his day had been ruined. Gilsu, in turn, thinks that it wasn't really his business, but it was bothering him for some reason. As Park walks away, a letter ends up falling out of his jacket without him noticing. Then, Gilsu ends up noticing that. Meanwhile, a group of people was inside a place, and another guy says that they were very pathetic, stating that he had heard that this week had been a failure. And all of that was because of those Heavenly Wind guys who collected money outside their territory. The other man asks him not to worry because they were going to deal with the Heavenly Wind, as they might have numbers, but none of them were useful. Meanwhile, Park seemed to be approaching that place. At that moment, the group notices the boy's presence. Park, in turn, says they had only two choices. One was to serve under the command of the Heavenly Wind, and the other was to leave and stay away from that place. He asks what they were going to do. The group of people starts laughing in the boy's face, asking if that wasn't Park, mentioning they had heard he had joined an organization to side with Kang, asking if he had come back to the Heavenly Wind. Then the flashback shows that man asking if he knew Mayan because that idiot was aiming at his territory, and for that reason Park should deal with him. And if he could do that, he would consider letting him return to the gang. Returning to the present, Park thinks that he had no choice if he wanted to restore his position. Immediately after, the two advanced toward the boy, asking if he had come alone to die. At that moment, Park manages to defend the attack. However, the other guy was already heading toward him. He delivers an attack to the boy. However, it didn't seem to have any effect, saying that the boy's arm was very strong. Shortly after, the group leaves the house, and Park, determined, tells them all to come at him at once. Thus, an intense battle was about to unfold. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.